When did you get wrecked for trying to do a good thing for an ungrateful jerk? Last night, my friends and I found a woman's wallet on the sidewalk in downtown Athens, Georgia. The driver's license had a name and date of birth, and she had a University of Georgia student card. We looked her up in the UGA directory and called her to return the wallet. She was grateful, and we felt like heroes. Well, guess what? She showed up to meet us with her tough guy boyfriend, who smelled like a brewery and accused us of stealing it. They tried to interrogate us for 5 minutes straight as we attempted to hand them the wallet and leave. We were baffled. We're 6 well-dressed UGA alumni and students, 2 females, 4 males, some in their 30s, working professionals, who had driven to meet her voluntarily to return the wallet. And she thought we were the thieves. It was unreal. They claimed $500 was missing from the wallet. Our immediate response was, "You carry around $500 in your wallet?" The boyfriend became irate and screamed, "Y'all ain't going nowhere till I found out which one of you frickin' gay slurs took it." Exact quote. Again, there were 6 of us there and 1 of him. Needless to say, we weren't intimidated. The girlfriend looked scared. I diffused the situation, separated everyone, and got the heck out of there. Anyone else ever do something nice that not only goes unappreciated, but you actually suffer for it? Tell me, what's your best no good deed goes unpunished story? I found a cell phone in the middle of the street. Nobody was around, so I figured I should check the contacts to find out who owned it. I figured home was a safe bet. I call and start talking after they pick up, only to be torn apart by the owner's mum, who thinks that I've stolen it. Apparently, the phone was lost the day before and they were looking. Anyways, the dude who owned it gave me $30 for returning it and $10 for, quote, dealing with his mom. So my good deed was punished, but I got a reward for being punished. Yay? In line at a 7-Eleven behind an elderly woman. She pays for her things and leaves. There's a banana sitting on the counter. The cashier looks up and calls out, "Miss, your banana," but she doesn't hear. I bolt after her and catch up quickly. "Hey, I think you left your banana inside." She turns to me and glares. "I didn't want the banana, you little bag of crap," and continues walking away. I found a wallet outside on a patio by the smokers area at a bar one time. So, as a smoker, I just hung out outside and asked everyone that came back out if they lost their wallet. One girl was like, "Oh my god, I did?" And I asked her to describe it. She did. I pulled it out and she was like, You took my freaking wallet." And I said, no, it was sitting on that bench right there. I figured it was better if I tried to find the owner rather than just let it sit there on a busy Friday night. She said, "I have every right to call the cops." I just said, "All right, wow, try to do a nice thing for someone? Whatever," and I threw her wallet into the parking lot and went back inside the bar. She called me a homophobic slur and told the bouncer to, quote, throw that guy out because I stole her wallet. The bouncer was standing on the patio the whole time and saw the freak out, and even the bouncer said he was only trying to help, and then he just ignored her ranting. I went inside and never heard or saw anything from her ever again. Okay, that's our second paranoid or scam artist ungrateful jerk who used that particular derogatory term that we can't say on YouTube, beginning with F. So there you have it. The correlation between stupidity and prejudice against the gays is very real. I found a dog, a pit bull, wandering in my neighborhood along a busy street. I hopped out of my car and put my dog's spare collar on him to keep him from being hit. I walked to all the nearby houses and knocked on the doors asking if anybody belonged to the dog or if they knew who did. After about 10 houses, I gave up and took him home. That afternoon, I made found dog flyers, without the dog's picture, about 100 in all, and put them up around the area. In front of my house, I put a big one so people would know that this was the place. After a few days, I'd pretty much resigned myself to keeping the guy when I got a phone call. This lady gave a perfect description of the dog, and I told her she could swing by and pick him up. About an hour later, she shows up with the cops. She gets out of her car and greets me with, "Are you the butthole that stole my dog?" I was, of course, taken aback. I stood there with a slack jaw, not knowing what to say. "I asked you a question. Did you steal my dog?" "What? No. I found a dog and tried to find his home." "You stole him, and I have witnesses." She then tried to get the officer to arrest me. It only took a few moments for the officer to realize that she was in fact crazy. "So he stole your dog, asked all of your neighbors who the dog belonged to, put up signs saying that he had the dog, and then invited you over to take the dog back. Ma'am, either he's the worst criminal in the world or you don't understand the definition of stole." She then claimed that I stole the dog for the reward money. The officer said he didn't see an offer for a reward, nor did I ask for one. But just out of curiosity, how much reward money were you going to offer? Asked the officer. $200. That's what he wants. That's why he took the dog. Well, we have no evidence of him stealing the dog, but it seems to me that he's earned the reward. That was the worst $200 I ever earned. I used to work for Walmart. Not once did a good deed go unpunished. If ever I found a wallet or purse, I'd carry it by the corner at arm's length and open it looking for an ID while under a camera, still keeping it at arm's length. That way, when they accused me of stealing, which I would never do, there was plenty of video coverage to protect me. Same with cell phones. I'd always look for a contact, mum or dad first. If I couldn't find one, I'd check recent calls. But I would always handle the thing like plutonium. I managed a pool for 10 years. It had a zero-depth area where the water got gradually deeper, like a beach. This was also the area with all the kiddie toys. Parents would send their toddlers out there on their own while they chatted, read, or sunbathed. The thing was like a succubus for toddlers, and 3 or 4 of them would go under daily, resulting in my guards or me going in and saving the lives of these children, lest they see Davy Jones' locker. The parents basically thought we were babysitters and didn't give a damn about their children while they were swimming. At least once a week, I'd have to deal with some parent flipping out about how their kid was fine and we had no right to touch them. Threats were made about cops and lawyers. Luckily, we always had a patrolman on duty at our pool. He'd laugh in their faces and threaten to arrest them for neglect, which usually shut them up. Once, one of my 98-pound female lifeguards saved 2 kids at the same time. Her reward? A smack across the face from an irate mother. I've never seen a cop react so fast. I missed that job. In short, watch your frickin' kids while they're at the pool. I was on the bus and I noticed some guy on his BlackBerry. Then I dozed off for a few minutes and I woke up and noticed the guy had left his phone on the bus. I picked it up and tried to find a number in it that I could dial to let him know I had it. I checked his Facebook and saw he'd updated his status from home saying some thug on the bus robbed him. He also said how horrible people are in LA, how it's a city filled with thieves and stuff like that. I updated his status, correcting him and letting him know that I had it and I could send it to him. He emailed me his address and I mailed it to him. He didn't even send a thank you email back. The guy was a prick. I stopped a man beating a woman at a bar. Instead, the woman started to hit me along with the guy. Then at the end, the man beat the woman again, saying he didn't need her help. I live in an area with fairly low-priced rentals, so it's full of college kids and people who are of lower incomes. I was at the corner store and the family in front of me had a case of beer, a 12-pack of Coke, a few packs of cigarettes, chicken nuggets, macaroni and cheese, and some milk. Their debit card got denied, so they took out the milk. Got denied again, took out the chicken. Got denied again, took out the mac and cheese. Finally, their purchase was approved, so they were going home with beer, Coke, and cigs. Their 2 kids, maybe 4 and 6, asked what they were having for dinner if they didn't have the chicken and nuggets. The mother's response was, "You can drink Coke, it's got calories." The younger kids started crying for the chicken nuggets. The mum grabbed her by the arm and told her she wasn't getting any dinner. I brought their chicken nuggets and ran after them. I tried to give them the box and the mum started screaming at me, "Do we look like a fricking charity case? I can raise my own fricking kids. You don't know what it's like being a mum." And tons of other bullcrap. I was like, just take the goddamn chicken, your kids are hungry. The woman hit the box out of my hands, and she and her man grabbed the kids and stormed away. I wish I'd followed them and called CPS or something. Eesh, yeah, those kids need to be with people who put them before their own unneeded comforts. Coke and cigarettes should be some way under your children getting fed properly on your priority list. So, I was outside this fast food place that sold hot dogs. I saw a homeless woman with a shopping cart trying to come out of the joint. She was struggling to open the door, so I did the gentlemanly thing and held the door open for her. I didn't know if that hobo was on smack or something, but she started yelling at me, telling me that she didn't need any help and told me to F right off. I let go of the door, it smacked her right in the face. I went shopping for a Halloween party with 2 friends from work. At the grocery store, one of the girls lost her wallet. We tore apart my car looking for it, went back into the store and looked everywhere. We never found it. 2 days later, I was back on that side of town, and I decided to go in and check for it in Lost and Found. We lived pretty far from that store, and she had no means of transportation. Somebody had found it. So, they let me take it to return it to her. Well, she wasn't too excited when I showed up at work with it. She was acting weird. I guess she and the other friend decided I was playing her the whole time, like I was hiding it so I could be the hero and return it to her. Lesson learned. I'm a girl, by the way, not a guy white knighting this other girl. We all worked together at Target. She was 19, I was 30. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Caution, this one is sad. My uncle's best friend is a man named Terry. Terry was a large man and quite the bruiser. In the mid-90s, Terry was at a local dive bar when he hears a man screaming at a woman. He really rips into her, spewing obscenities loudly across the bar. Terry steps in, tells the guy to keep it down, or to take it home. Nobody wants to hear their problems. The girl runs off to the bathroom crying, and the man apologizes to Terry, telling him, "Sorry man, I just found out she cheated on me." The guy promises to keep it down, and Terry walks away. When the girl comes back from the bathroom, the yelling resumes, and the guy hauls off and hits her. The girl runs off, and Terry comes charging over to give the guy an ultimatum. Terry offers to kick the crap out of the guy or let him walk out on his own. The guy chooses the latter. A couple of minutes pass and the bar phone rings. It's a call for Terry. Terry picks up the phone and almost instantly drops to the floor in agony. The man went across the street to a payphone, called the bar, asked for Terry, then snuck back in and stabbed him 3 times in the back, making him a paraplegic. The guy took off running but was caught later. Being that Terry was a big biker with a bunch of big biker friends, the man had fled for fear of retaliation, then turned himself in. Terry is and always will be in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down, all for standing up for a girl who was getting beat up by her boyfriend. A buddy of mine blew the motor in his truck. I knew of an engine 200 miles away that would be a good replacement, so I drive there, pay $250 to load it in my truck and drive it back. I leave the motor at the local shop and it gets put in the truck. 1 week later, he sells the truck and never pays me for the motor. He had cancer, so I wasn't about to use him as a kickball. He died 6 years ago. The cancer was the reason I went out of my way to help. I lent a very good friend about $500. His parents were fairly well off, and I knew his parents sent him a huge check every birthday because we'd always travel right after he got the check. It was an annual 10 grand gift the parents are allowed to distribute tax-free to their kids. So I knew I'd get it back in a few weeks. Being mindful, I told him under no uncertain terms that this was a loan and expected to be paid back by X date. Period. He agreed. Well, payback date came and passed and nothing. Yet his birthday was about 2 weeks afterwards, so I waited until after his birthday. Still no check. I called him on it and asked what happened. I got lie after lie. First, his checking account was compromised, then he needed to order checks. Then he was waiting for his parents' check to arrive. He even went so far as to send me a check on a closed account, which was stupid because I knew from talking to him the account was closed and he didn't bank there anymore, and it had his old address on it from 2 years ago. I asked him why he'd send me a check on a closed account, and I got yelled at for, quote, not being a good friend, and for not being supportive of his problems. I was very nice to him up until this point, but I let him have it. I'm not a good friend. I lend you $500 so you can pay your rent and don't say a word about it for weeks, and you say I'm not supportive? A good friend would pay me back without the lies and forcing me to call you and ask you for the money. I had a check in the mail the same week and I haven't talked to him since. If you're reading this, screw you. I helped 2 guys out of a crushed car, putting my life in danger as the gas was spilling out. They ran away as soon as I got them out. Turns out the car was stolen and the police were onto them. The cops found me on top of the car holding the door open and arrested me. I spent the night in jail for that good deed. Another time I worked in a restaurant at the beach. As I was closing, I saw a kid wandering around crying. I abandoned my work and stayed with her for 4 hours or something, calling the cops, trying out numbers that she remembers, stuff like that. When the cops and the parents finally came, they started interrogating me like I'd kidnapped her or something. After some time, I got angry and started shouting, and they just told me to go away. Not even a thank you or anything. Another time, a guy in front of me at the ATM left a full wallet on the machine and walked away. I wasn't paying attention to him, so I didn't even notice what he was wearing. So I took the wallet into the bank and explained at the counter what had happened. There's a wad of cash in there. I say I have to leave, but was asked politely at first that I have to stay until they contact the owner. I say I have to leave. I had something important to do. Instead, the security guys detain me for like 30 minutes until the owner shows up. He says everything is in there. I'm just standing there. Nobody told him that I found it. They just told me, you can leave now. I had dreadlocks all these times and my skin color is of the darker kind, so maybe that played a role. Maybe not. I just continue doing good when I can, and most of the time, it's appreciated. I was at the mall and some little boy came up to me asking, "Can you help me find my mummy?" I walked him over to the security desk and had them page her. She showed up 30 minutes later and then got all angry at me, acting like I was some kind of weird predator. She then stormed off with her unfortunate son, but not before he yelled, "Thanks, mister," to me. I feel bad for that kid. Well, at least her kid was a civilized person, even if she wasn't. I was about to say that maybe we can give her the benefit of the doubt as a concerned parent, but then I remember you saying that it took her 30 minutes to come and collect her kid in the same mall. So I guess the odds of her just being trash rose substantially again. This is why when I found someone's bank card lying in the street, I picked it up, handed it in at the bank the next day, and got out of there quickly. I didn't want to be arrested for stealing, for helping some poor student who'd lost their card. It was obviously a student, it had been lost outside the university nightclub. I'm writing this as the witness of the punishers. So my boyfriend and I had just graduated, and were naturally receiving some cards in the mail. Some with money, some without, whatever. Anyways, my boyfriend has this grandpa who inherited a ton of money way back when, and has since invested, by which I mean lost, most of it in the stock market. The family always rants about how he doesn't give a crap about them and tries to milk him for money. He bought their 2 cars before he lost a bunch of his money. My boyfriend received a card from him with no money in it and laughed at the snarky message. Money is fleeting, knowledge is power, and seemed happy enough. A few days later, his mum was making a list of everyone who sent him cards. She even writes down how much each person sent, as if that would determine the extent of her thank you, and compares the amounts. When the grandpa comes up and she remembers he didn't send any money, she doesn't write his name down. Apparently she planned to only send thank yous to the people who sent cash. She and her husband then proceeded to bitterly remark, with the biggest eye rolls possible, that since the grandpa had decided to help pay for my boyfriend's college education, they guessed that made up for it. As someone who hasn't seen or heard from my grandparents and the majority of my extended family since I was 5 due to family pettiness, I was teed off. When I was 17, a gust of wind ripped my car door out of my hand and into the car that I was parked next to. I went into the store and had the manager call for the owner of the car using the description and license plate number. Nobody came forward. I went back out to the parking lot and waited for the owner to show up. When the owners arrived, I told them I was sorry that I'd dinged the side of their door. I showed them the small dent and offered to exchange insurance information. The wife was a straight-up witch. She started huffing and puffing, walking around her car and finding other dents in her fender, rear quarter panel, places that it would have been impossible for my door to have caused damage. I told her that I didn't cause any of the other stuff and she should be lucky that I was an honest person, as most people would have just found another parking spot and not told her at all. Her husband came to my rescue and calmed her down and explained that I couldn't have caused the other dents. He even opened up my door to show it wasn't possible. She went on and wanted to exchange insurance info. Her husband ushered her into their car and told me to just go. He said he wasn't worried about the dent I caused and thanked me for being so honest. As they were pulling away, his wife glared at me until I was out of sight. I had a letter in my mailbox, so I opened it as I tend to do with things I find in my mailbox. I hadn't realized that the name on the envelope was someone I'd never heard of, but the address was correct except there was a unit number even though I live in a townhouse. It was 3 passports and cash with a letter from Canada Customs and Immigration. I decided to take a shot in the dark and try the building across the street, and found her name in the building directory. She came down and proceeded to give me crap for opening her letter. I told her it was an accident and that everything was in there, but it had no effect on her. I said, "No problem, any future letters for you will go in the garbage unopened," and I walked away. But even if I did get another letter for her, I'd probably still drop it off. I have a few of one of my ex-best friends taking advantage. One that comes to mind is that he was behind on some money, and I let him borrow my netbook to Skype with his wife while he went overseas. It ended up getting smashed or broken somehow, and he wasn't able to pay me back when he returned. But he'd bought himself a new laptop and tons of stuff for himself before paying me a dime. I also let him borrow my 360 while I was overseas so his kid and he could play, since it was just going to be sitting in a garage anyway. I never saw that thing again because evidently it was stolen. That's just a few things of a whole laundry list of things I've done for that guy, but I think a lot of it was my own fault for not being more mindful of him and how he exploited my weakness towards helping friends out. I managed to get $100 out of him for my netbook. It cost around $250, and that was about the end of our friendship. I have a hard time doing good deeds for people after that happened. There was this huge scandal in China a while back while I was living in Shanghai. An elderly woman was crossing the street and was hit by a guy on a scooter. She fell down and was injured while the man who hit her drove off. A man nearby saw what happened and came over to help her and offered to take her to the hospital. The old lady freaked out and started accusing the man of hitting her, which he didn't. Her response was, "Why are you offering to help me if you didn't knock me down in the first place?" She pressed charges and took him to court, and it was a media frenzy in China. I don't know what actually happened from the court cases, since, the Chinese tend to make these news stories mysteriously disappear if it gains too much attention. Between these answers and the ones about encountering horrible customers, I have the sudden urge to murder people. When did a wacky or specific law win a court case? I got a pro bono client's removal by US CIS cancelled. He had a low-level substance possession conviction from the early 1980s. During that brief period, the active ingredient of Imodium was illegal under state law but not federal law. So I successfully argued that they couldn't prove it wasn't a conviction for possession of a substance that was federally legal at the time, and as such was not subject to removal. The argument worked, and my guy went back to his business and his family. I had a case where a guy was charged for running a red light. The thing is, he'd been sitting at the lights for 5 minutes and it hadn't changed. The wording of the specific section under which he was charged related to stop signs and traffic lights and referred to them as traffic regulation devices. I successfully argued that as the traffic light wasn't changing, it wasn't regulating traffic, and he got off. I couldn't believe it when the judge ruled in my favor. Neither could the police prosecutor. I did some research for this case when I was a law student, Jolie vs. Palacier, 1999. Some background, this was at a time when the Ontario Court of Appeal had held that, if there were any factual matters in dispute, a case could not be dismissed on summary judgment. That's not the case today. It was discovered that this position basically ruined summary judgment as a useful process. But it was the case at the time. In such a motion, all facts alleged by the plaintiff would be assumed to be true. What happened was this. A man sued, among others, the College of Dental Surgeons for persecuting him and interfering in his ability to live as a generic Martian. The plaintiff claimed he had been cloned from space debris NASA found in the 1960s. He claimed he had a genetic test to prove this, but it had been falsified by the CIA as part of the conspiracy against him. Well, naturally, this claim raises the concern that the plaintiff was bonkers, but there was no evidence, aside from his bizarre claims, of that being so. In court, the case was decided on 2 alternate grounds. First, on the boring grounds that the case was patently frivolous and vexatious because it was absurd. However, it was also decided on a more entertaining basis of standing. Justice Epstein held that only a person could commence an action in Ontario. The rules of civil procedure define a person to be either a human being or a corporation. The plaintiff's whole case was based on him being a Martian. If he was not a Martian, the case had no merit. If he was a Martian, he lacked standing to commence a lawsuit in Ontario. In short, we now have precedent that Martians cannot sue in Ontario. Well, Ontarians, you can rest easy knowing that one particular section of the extraterrestrial community can no longer take you to court for emotional copyright and, most importantly, property damages. You know what that means. Man the artillery in Ontario and let's get those Martians before they sue us. 47 USC 227B. Restrictions on use of automated telephone equipment. Law student working at a law firm here. We have a fax machine that gets tons of spam faxes. Our chief partner has a vendetta against spam, and he uses it to give us practice in researching and writing petitions. So we catalog each fax, send replies to take us off the list, document everything and wait for them to fax us again. Then we follow up with an FCC complaint and a demand letter. A couple of times, this has ended up with the person getting mad and sending us retaliatory faxes, black sheets of paper. If they stop sending, we don't do anything. But we've gone to small claims a couple of times and gotten $500 per page a few times. We also got someone trying to sell substances through fax, but we just turned that over to the police. I had a client with a serious medical problem that cost her job, and she was preparing to file bankruptcy on the medical bills and credit card debts. Thing was, she had like 15 grand socked away and didn't tell me. It was all that was left of her life savings. Before we filed her case, she gave it to her mum for safekeeping. What she didn't know is that she could have kept the money through the bankruptcy, but giving it away beforehand is a no-no. I had to tell the court when I found out, and when this happens, the court gets the right to sue the mum for the 15 grand. The thing is, the mum's debt to her daughter's bankruptcy court? Also dischargeable in bankruptcy. So the mum filed bankruptcy too, and they got to keep the money after all. The Canadian Interest Act specifies that all interest must be specified in a per annum percentage. If it's not, it's struck down to 5% simple interest per year. The number of lenders and creditors who try to pull off a 4% monthly compound interest but aren't familiar with that provision of federal law? Let me explain. Shady outfit offers to sell you a used car with an interest rate of 3% per month. Neglects to mention that it's 36% per year. Debtor makes payments that they think should equal the correct value, only to learn that most of their money went toward interest. Demand letters and claims tended to go away quickly upon faxing over that page of the statute. I won a case where the defendant, New York City, tried to exploit a really stupid law, which I was able to use to win a case. This was a slip-and-fall case where my client had tripped on a piece of broken sidewalk outside the Natural History Museum and shattered her arm and wrist. The law is that the property owner is responsible for the sidewalk directly outside their property, the theory being that even if they can't fix it, they have a duty to warn people about hazards and mark the area off. The museum was owned by the city. There's another concept called sovereign immunity, which is that governments can't be sued without their consent. So the city had passed a very, very stupid law that they would be exempted from the rule that they can't be sued for sidewalk injuries unless you can show that they were on notice of a hazard. Meaning that you would have to show that you informed the Secretary of State or Governor or Mayor of the exact specific crack in the sidewalk before the injury occurred, and that you had to do so in writing with ample time for the city to remedy it. 180 days in advance, if I recall correctly. Under normal circumstances, this is impossible because no one anticipates tripping on the sidewalk 180 days in advance with the foresight to write a letter to the mayor about that specific crack. Luckily, someone did have that foresight, and there was a non-profit group called Big Apple Maps, which would go around the city with maps of government property and record with insane specificity each and every crack in the sidewalk, pothole, protrusion, and other hazard, and then publish these maps while serving copies on the government, with the express purpose of combating sovereign immunity defenses in slip-and-fall cases against the government. I got a hold of one of these maps and visited the site, and I was able to take pictures of the section of the sidewalk where my client fell, and you could see newly placed cement over the area in the exact position indicated on the map, showing where the sidewalk had been repaired after my client had slipped. Basically, the government's attorney brought up the sovereign immunity defense and outlined all of the stupid steps I would have needed to go through to overcome their motion to dismiss. My response was, "Oh, you mean this?" and gave them the map. Immediate settlement. I had a friend trip over a huge crack in the sidewalk. The city tried saying they didn't know. I'd submitted pictures and a complaint about the crack almost a year prior. He was very thankful I did it, as it basically won his case. There was a case here in Hawaii that got thrown out. Someone got pulled over because the police saw that she had way too many passengers in the car. Then they noticed she was drunk. Open and shut case. Well, apparently in Hawaii, there's no law defining the maximum number of passengers in a private vehicle. So the issue was that all the extra passengers weren't wearing seatbelts. Well, this failed also because the law only says that every available seatbelt needs to be in use. If you have 6 passengers and only 5 seatbelts, there's nothing at all illegal about the 6th being unrestrained. So, since there was no probable cause to pull her over in the first place, even though she was indefensibly drunk, the whole thing got thrown out. Hawaii has some very counterintuitive laws. If your truck has seats installed in the bed, your passengers must be buckled up. If not, they can just party back there, while anyone in the cab unbuckled would get you a major ticket. People regularly ride down the freeway in truck beds while sitting in lawn chairs. I mean, that last image is both hilarious and ever so slightly concerning. My GTA instincts are just envisioning the inevitable crash and subsequent catapulted people being shot out like a basket of rocks from a mangonel. I think something's wrong with me. I had a roommate who got picked up for public intoxication one St. Patrick's Day. He was in jail for a couple of days, which seemed odd for a PI. Turned out he had a warrant from another city for escaping jail. The year before, he got picked up for public intoxication on St. Patrick's Day? He had a hazy memory of being shuffled down a hallway with a bunch of other drunkards at the jail before walking through a door and suddenly being alone outside. From there, he just walked home. The police never came looking for him, so he wasn't sure it had happened. Anyway, it turns out they never even properly booked him, so while there was a warrant for him escaping jail, there was no record of him ever being arrested. Case dismissed. This is how a lot of DUI cases are argued and won in the US, that the initial pullover wasn't justified or that there wasn't a legitimate reason to investigate a DUI after the pullover, or insufficient reason for arrest. Even if you blow over on the breathalyzer, they have to have enough reason to have you blow in the first place. I have one where we won, but it didn't go as planned. I had a client a while ago who was incarcerated at a state prison farm. Inmates had to spend 40 to 60 hours a week preparing slop for the hogs from expired restaurant food and cleaning the hog barns. He reeked every time I met him, even after showering. He said it was miserable. Well, he found out that some Muslim inmates who couldn't work with pigs were offered to be able to work at the police horse stable instead, 5 minutes down the road. He wanted to sue, saying that stable work is much less revolting than hog work, and that this amounted to unequal punishment on the basis of religion. I thought he had a point. Well, the case didn't get thrown out and actually got some traction, but then the prison changed their policies in response. Inmates who couldn't work around pigs or didn't want to would instead be transported to a factory chicken barn the next county over for work each day. He asked that I drop the lawsuit, and the Muslim inmates were not happy with him. A guy I know got drunk and decided to ride his horse through town. This was a small town in North Carolina. Well, he'd stop at each intersection and fire his pistol in the air like some Wild West cowboy. Anyway, the guy was charged with a DUI and discharging a firearm within city limits, which was a felony. So, as one would soon find, it's not just mandatory, but a law you must fire your firearm into the air at an intersection when coming through town on your horse. An old blue law that never got erased. He still got the DUI and his horse got impounded, but the dumbfounded judge dropped the other charges. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Over 10 years ago, I'd been at fault for rear-ending someone else. I had no insurance and my license had expired. I don't think I need to mention that I was in a very destitute, low place in life, struggling with almost every conceivable aspect of living. The cop was very kind as we talked, but wrote me a ticket for it all. One was kind of a fix-it ticket about my suspended license. I sorted that out in the days after, and nothing came of the ticket. The cop had mentioned that he had to write the insurance ticket, but to take it into court and get it lowered. I was desperate to try and get my $800 insurance ticket lowered because I couldn't afford something like that. So I took the cop's advice. I went into traffic court weeks later, and when it was time to chat with the judge in front of everyone there, the judge looked at the ticket, stopped, and said, "I would like to use Mr. South Seattle's case as an example to the gallery." I almost died. He went on, "This is a court of law, but it's also a court of fairness. It seems as if the officer didn't write the date of the incident in the ticket. I can't hold Mr. South Seattle accountable to this." My jaw dropped. I stood there. The judge told me I was free to go twice before it registered. I'm pretty sure that the cop deliberately didn't write the date on the ticket. Thanks, officer. I had a very similar thing happen. I rear-ended someone, but it turned out the person I hit had a warrant for their arrest. While other cops were taking care of that, another came over to me and gave me a ticket. While he did that, he flipped it over and showed me the instructions to fight it in court. Well, I followed those instructions, and when I got to court, the officer had a family emergency and wasn't able to go, which threw out the case and also my ticket. Thank you to whoever that was. Had a case where the defendant, my opponent, filed an appeal from an administrative agency to the local circuit court. The requirement for filing the appeal was very strict, and the filing must include an appeal bond, executed by the individual defendant or a corporate officer. When my opponent's assistant electronically filed the appeal, she attached a PDF of the bond, without the corporate signature. There's no question in my mind that they had the bond with the requisite signature, and simply attached the wrong version of the document to the filing. I wish I could say there was a huge court fight over this, and I got to slam my opponent, but that's not how this works among professionals. I waited until after the time to correct this error had passed. I then politely called my opponent and told him I was holding the I win button, and that I'd be filing a motion to that effect in a week. My opponent came to me with very favorable settlement terms within days. To this day, I don't know for sure if my opponent ever disclosed his mistake to his client, but I doubt it. In 2016, prison inmate John Modi was charged with escaping from the prison in which he was incarcerated, which is a crime in Ohio. The prosecution, however, failed to establish that the Hocking Correctional Facility, and therefore the crime, was located within the court's jurisdiction of Hocking County, as all witnesses potentially able to offer testimony on the prison's location had gone home for the day. And, incredibly, no one remaining could provide references allowing the court to take judicial notice of the prison's location. The charges against Modi were dismissed and he was allowed to return to prison to serve his sentence, but at least without additional charges concerning his alleged escape. Okay, for a second the narrator thought that Modi was going to just be let off scot-free, which would have been a massive oversight if he was a repeat murderer or something. However, that notion isn't impossible in some jurisdictions it seems, as the following story indicates. I had a family friend, old guy, passed away now, who said that he was able to escape from prison, and because he escaped, was let go. Because no one was supposed to be able to escape from that prison or something like that, he sometimes told stories. But the few things he told me about his crimes, major theft, I didn't believe. But I later saw the court papers and they were true. He was a jailhouse lawyer and had a whole bookshelf of legal books. I don't recall which prison it was, although I know he was in Arkansas for at least part of his stay. Not a lawyer, but I did enough law research to get myself out of a parking ticket one time. When I was in college, I was in the marching band. We had a storage room in the basement of one of the dorms. I was going to get something out of the storage room and parked in the loading dock behind the dorm. There was just enough room next to a dumpster to fit my car. I didn't want to spend $5 on a loading zone pass from parking services, because I was a broke college student, so I just parked. I was only going to be 2 minutes anyway. I finished picking up what I need to. Sure enough, I came back out to my car to a parking ticket. Except it wasn't the $25 ticket for a parking in the loading zone, it was $75 tickets for parking in a fire lane. What the frick? There was a single sign at the very front of the side road leading up to the loading zone, but no curb paint, no indication of where the fire lane started and where it stopped. I called parking enforcement telling them this and they wouldn't budge. Fine. I took pictures of the loading dock and I submitted an information request to obtain the evidence pictures. I got the pictures and started researching fire lane requirements in the state. What I found clearly indicated that curb stripes were mandatory. I called parking enforcement and told them what I found and they still wouldn't budge. Frustratingly, I looked at the law again. The part they cited for me said that nothing could obstruct a fire lane at any time. I looked back at the evidence photos and saw the dumpster next to my car. If this was a fire lane, then the dumpster was blocking the fire lane too. The same state law they cited me with said that non-vehicle obstruction of a fire lane was subject to a fine of $1,500 per day. I found satellite imagery from 4 years prior showing that the dumpster had been there for at least 4 years. So I argued to university parking enforcement that if this was a fire lane, then the university had been obstructing it for the last 4 years and would owe the state $2.2 million in fines if I reported it. The parking ticket disappeared immediately when I sent the appeals committee their own evidence photos, satellite imagery, and the same state law they cited me with. I drove by a week later and the dumpster was gone, the curb was painted, and 2 brand new fire lane signs were up. In short, got a parking ticket for parking in a fire lane at my university. Successfully argued the university owed $2.2 million in fines to the state if it was really a fire lane, and the $75 parking ticket was dropped. The first and only time I ever used the subway station's emergency door to get to the train, the ticket gate wasn't working, it was 3 a.m., I was a drunk college kid trying to catch the last train home, and basically I got caught by 2 subway officers and given a ticket with a huge attempted fare avoidance fine. I showed up to the hearing in desperation and they ended up having to drop the fine as they were reviewing the case with me because one cop had recorded that I entered through the right-hand emergency door and the other wrote that I entered through the left-hand emergency door. Never been so grateful in my life. I once won a case that forbade the possession or transport of human urine in order to adulterate a urine screen. I had a client who was caught with a little container of alleged urine that he may or may not have been able to use to mess up a drug screen. Since he hadn't messed with a drug screen or actually tried to mess with one yet, he couldn't be charged with that. So he was charged with trying to transport human urine with the intent to adulterate a urine screen. It wasn't human urine. It was fake lab-made urine from a website, meaning that I got to argue, 1, the prosecution hadn't proven it was human urine, they hadn't tested it, And 2, they deprived us of the opportunity to test it because the officer poured it out before giving the container back to the client. And 3, my client could literally testify that it wasn't human urine. He's still known around the office as Human Urine Guy. We have a lot of nicknames like that around here. Human Urine Guy, Drywall Guy, Donkey Kick Guy, Fire Truck Guy, Backpack Girl, Cornhole Board Guy. As a bonus, the prosecutor got offended because I made a motion to suppress the search of my client based on violation of the Fourth Amendment. Prosecutor thought we'd agreed that the search was good. The search was good based on the facts in the police report. Not my fault that the police officer testified like an idiot once he got on the stand. My brother is a lawyer. He got a DUI charge dropped for a client. Guy gets pulled over, the cop asks him to step out to perform the sobriety test after he admits to having consumed some amount of alcohol. He complies, but after stepping out of his car, he asks the officer if it's okay for him to reposition the vehicle to move it further away from the road, because he feels uncomfortable with it being that close. The cop obliges. Apparently, the charge got dropped because the officer willingly let an intoxicated individual operate a motor vehicle. This happened with a guy I knew on his boat. He has a huge 65-foot Viking, and the cops couldn't dock it, so they asked him to. His lawyer shows up and says, "The cops made my client dock his own boat after they decided to take him in for DUI. Sober Water Patrol couldn't dock the boat, but an impaired person can?" The case was dismissed. I once had a client who woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone in his home. He retrieved a Colt 1911 from a bedside table, walked into his living room and confronted the figure in the dark. The person didn't identify himself but moved towards my client, who fired a single shot that went through the person's shoulder. Turned out it was my client's stepson who'd snuck out, been drinking underage and stumbled home. The problem with the situation was that my client was a convicted felon, several times over. That meant that while the shooting itself was legally defensible, his possession of the firearm was not. We looked into the history of the gun itself, as our client had indicated it had belonged to his grandfather, who'd served in the US Army in the early 20th century. Ultimately, we were able to bring multiple experts in and establish that the gun had been among the first batch of firearms distributed from Colt to the US Army at the Augusta Armory. Florida Statute 7090.001 creates an exemption of firearm-related laws, including the prohibition for felons to possess a firearm if the firearm in question was an antique, meaning it was manufactured prior to 1918. Since we could establish the history of the firearm to have been manufactured before 1918, our client couldn't be prosecuted for the offense and got out from underneath a potential mandatory prison sentence. What did the weird kid do to earn that reputation? The weird kid at my school always claimed she was a wizard, and when someone spoke to her when she was, quote, casting a spell, i.e. screaming at the ground, she would turn around and either scream in their face or slap them. I was new to the school at the time, and I got screamed at because I was legitimately worried that she might be hurt or something. There was this guy, one class below me, who just ate everything. Once he went to the front of the classroom where the sink thingy is, took a big stack of paper towels back to his place, and just started eating it mid-lesson. Another time he drank a Capri Sun in class, and when he was finished, he just ate the package with straw and everything. The weirdest thing was when he ate a toy car that the teacher brought to show something. He just sat in front of the teacher's desk, took the car from it, and swallowed it without saying anything. He brought a live lobster to a middle school dance and let it go on the dance floor during the dance. It wasn't even a question of, who would have done this? It was Nate. Nate did it. He thought he was a robot. Often you'd find him in the halls, alone, talking to electronics about destroying the human race or having a conversation with a locker. Flick the bean during class, then brought a cake the next day to apologize. There was a girl in my school that got caught trying to color her entire tongue with a black Sharpie in like 7th grade. It was honestly surreal to witness. The teacher was so confused and just walked her to the principal. A few years later, she was expelled for drinking booze during school on multiple occasions. Did a countdown to his toots like they were a fricking moon launch. Of all the things I thought I would find in this thread, inspiration wasn't one of them. I mean, this guy just sounds fricking funny, and like he was waiting to basically age into dadhood. Godspeed, sir. Pulled out his armpit or downstairs hair one by one and ate them. ate a live lizard while the entire school was hanging out on the football field during a fire drill. Set his arm on fire on a school trip to France. Sprayed his arm with deodorant for about a whole minute before getting someone to light it. It wouldn't go out until he used the tap in the bathroom to douse it with water. He ended up with blisters and permanent scarring. So the school trip ends and we get to go back to school the week after. All of a sudden, me and 4 other kids got pulled into a classroom to be questioned by police and the head teacher. He basically told his mum that we did it to him. Obviously, this didn't stick as we all had the same story. If I had Facebook, I'd look him up to see how life is for him nowadays. Screw people like that. A classmate in elementary broke his arm doing dumb crap and tried to frame us for it because he was so embarrassed. He pulled some crap like that later in school life too. My man would wear a stormtrooper costume and taped an old flip-up phone to his arm and pretend to talk through it. This was in high school. He was particularly odd because he was like a born genius, so he'd often get bored in class and do some weird stuff. To be honest, looking back on it, I feel really bad for the guy. He was incredibly smart but had zero social skills and an unfortunate lump of fat right on his forehead that people would bully him for. It was also like he tried to get in trouble every chance he could. Anyways, some things he did that came to mind. He would pick at and pop his pimples in class. Like pimples on his arms and shoulders, he'd just go to town on them and be all red and marked by the end. When I was in school, we had a serious no electronics policy. A few times he'd bring his Nintendo DS and play that thing full volume and of course off to detention. Because he was so smart, he'd often correct teachers and other students, but in the rudest way possible. And he was always technically correct, if that makes any sense, also often resulting in detention. Can't think of any more specifically fun stories. He rarely showed up to school, to be honest. Maybe because he felt he didn't need to, or maybe because everyone, including the teachers, weren't always the nicest to the kid. Got caught whacking it in the school bathroom, then later got his member stuck in a shampoo bottle. Guys, if you get your small sir stuck in a shampoo bottle and your mum has to take you to hospital to remedy the situation, you need to keep that to yourselves. There is no teenager in the world who's going to keep that knowledge to themselves. Yar, he dressed as a pirate every day for 8 years. Legitimately said he was leaving rural Michigan to move to the Caribbean and become a pirate. Changed his name to Blackbeard Ryan. Raised his hand, and when the teacher called on him to answer his question, he started singing Frere Jacques. Cut himself in class, waited for the blood to congeal a bit, and then just ate it. Just writing that made me gag. Years later, he got arrested for stabbing someone. Well, did the deed with a goat lad. He had a notoriety for crapping his pants at least once a day and was super casual about it. I remember I was behind him in the hall one day when I saw a massive log just plop out of his short legs. He looked back at it and just kept on strutting. Whoa, wait, what the heck? Was the kid just walking around fully loaded all day, and crap coming out of his pants was a once-a-day thing? Yeah, seriously, it got so bad that administration got involved and ended up requiring him to wear diapers. He was at a high level of not giving a frick. Damn, you usually don't get to that point until you're old. Maybe he's not giving a frick because he's too busy giving a crap. He drew Pokemons getting busy with each other during class, for a few years. Collected earthworms when it rained in the pouch of his hoodie, and then laid them out in the schoolyard spelling his own name. He cried when he saw that it had been scraped from the pavement the next day. By that time, he was around 13. Predictably, people, by which I mean we, started calling him Worm Kid. He got expelled around a year later for throwing a fistful of earth at a teacher. To elaborate on him having to leave the school, this act of dirt tossing happened inside of a classroom at close proximity when he'd been called to the blackboard during a Latin lesson. I'm from Europe. The teacher completely lost their crap. The moist soil was all in her hair, and she later said a couple of live beetles and little pebbles or bone splinters were also found in that mix, though I can't say whether that's true. I mean, there were so many examples, but this one stuck out to me. There were twin boys in my high school who were just odd. We were in Spanish class together, and the teacher had this habit of making beeping sounds to get the attention of students who were talking. So one day that's happening and the teacher goes, beep, 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 and one of the twins shouts, "Fire the missiles!" and crawls under his desk and runs out of the room. I thought it was so funny, I about fell out of my chair laughing. I don't know. Is that an end of the world reference from that kid, or just very specifically random? The age of this post would imply that it was a bit too recent for it to reference that specific animation. I guess the narrator will never know. When we were about 15, Harrison, we were all addressed by our surnames, decided to one day wrap his eggplant in adhesive tape during a biology lesson. I can't remember why nor how he managed to remove it, but I was impressed. He also held the record for stabbing into the desk between each finger of his outstretched hand with a compass, a very sharp point, as fast as possible despite hitting a finger at least once. He later became a distinguished surgeon. He would bark like a dog when talked to. He probably had some mental problems, but most people just avoided him. A girl in my year at school told us she has a ghost in her bedroom and it told her that if she didn't brush her teeth, it would burn her house down. Another girl said she wanted to do the deed with our headmaster, but she was like 7 at the time, and she used to scratch people in the face like a cat. I held the door open for her once and she flipped me off and called me a fricking B-word. I knew a girl who'd developed much earlier than everyone else. She had like double D's and severe acne in grade 6. She used to act out weird scenes from TV shows by herself at recess. She was the type who told everyone she had a boyfriend who had a Porsche, but went to a different school. Again, we were like 12. People made fun of her for the usual things and crap she did, but one day things took a dark and strange turn. Some girl named Katie said something to her in line after lunch, and she lost it. She smoked Katie in the head with her flute case and then hit some other kid who wasn't saying anything. She then spit chocolate milk all over a teacher who asked her what was going on. Everyone was pretty shocked, but then she proceeded to sit down on the ground, started to cry, and peed her pants right there. The ground was kind of sloped away from the school, so a puddle formed and then created like a stream of pee all the way to the field, maybe about 15 to 20 feet. Everyone just stood there in shock at how many things had just happened in the span of 90 seconds. For those asking what she's doing now, I asked a couple of people if anyone knew, and I was told last they'd heard she had a daughter with her partner and seemed happy. We were freshmen in an urban high school. He made increasingly wild claims like he had a bunch of illegal automatic weapons, he made poison darts and blow guns, his sensei could outrun an arrow fired from a bow, and he was learning how to do it himself, and that he had a nitro kit in his Trans Am that he used to outrun police. He was transferred to another school. The next I heard of him 2 years later, he had crashed into a brick wall and died while fleeing the police. The report said he lost control when he engaged his nitro kit. Ate a battery in class, peed in a bottle on a bus full of 60 kids, chipped his tooth sucking on a Tajin packet. All of his siblings are named the same name, Martin. Is his name Martin? Yes. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm not really sure what this guy did, but he was a fun guy to be around, presumably just ugly and visibly mentally ill. Once he said he was going to bring a surprise to a pep rally and got talked to by police, but it turned out just to be a bucket full of candy. He got nominated Homecoming King, despite the principal trying to stop him from being elected. He won. He had a ton of school spirit too. It was really weird. And yeah, a lot of people have concerns about it being a Carrie type situation, but I don't think it was, as the kids said that the principal didn't like him at all and seemed to wait for him to make mistakes, just so that he could dish out a punishment. I overheard the guy talking about it with his friends, and I remember that he was called to the principal's office to talk about it, but he didn't say anything about the principal being scared of him, being teased or anything. My memory's a little hazy, but I'm pretty sure it was just because he wouldn't fit the school's image. That's what the kid felt, at least. I finally found out what made him the weird kid. He tore up a tree in the school parking lot and beat a car with it. Other than that, though, he seemed well liked. We had that horse girl. She always pranced around like a horse, would snort in surprise, that sort of thing. In grade 5 and 6, she always wanted to play horses. My friends and I told her that was so lame and then would go off to play wolves instead. Took a bite of a urinal cake because he was curious. Ugh. This one kid at the tender age of 12 found a used rubber in the gutter, washed it out, and then subsequently propositioned a girl in his class by showing it to her and asking her to do the deed with him in the toilets at lunch. I was the president of the improv club at my high school. The weird kid was a member. Now, remember that episode of The Office when Michael would interrupt every improv scene as a cop? It was like that, except this kid always had an evil or dark magic theme. Characters in the scenes turned out to be his evil brother from the Dark Outlands. Imaginary props would turn into mythic swords formed from shadows. But this kid was so desperately unpopular, no one had the heart to kick him out of the club. I mean, it kinda sounds like this kid just wanted to LARP. Yeah, can you imagine how much he would have loved that? The narrator sincerely hopes this kid found the LARP Society, or at the very least, discovered RPGs, and finally found his people. He would crank it everywhere and be caught, like all the time. In class, on the football field, in the tuba room, you name it. He also claimed with all seriousness to everyone that he was dating the most popular girl at our school. She was in a long-term relationship with another one of the popular kids, so everyone knew he was full of crap, but he stuck to his guns. Wore the same blue dress every single day to school. Sat in the hall by herself during all class parties. I know she was a Jehovah's Witness, but it wasn't until I was older that I understood what that meant, and how isolating it must have been for her as an 8-year-old and up. The only one in that tiny farm town with nobody even wanting to sit by her on the bus. I still feel it in my gut when I think about her from time to time, 5 decades later. She never did anything to any of us. Sorry, Ramona. I went to Parkland a few years back. In my first period, we had Nicholas Cruz in our science class. Whenever he was called on, no matter what question, he'd always yell out B, as in, that's the answer. He sat in the middle of class and one girl kept flirting with him by stabbing him in the back of the head with a pencil, while her friend laughed along. We graduated before he committed mass murder. In 4th grade, this kid brought metal Chinese throwing stars to school and started throwing them around the classroom. He was gone for about a week, and then a few weeks after that, he pulled out some nunchucks and hit a girl in the face. We didn't see him for the rest of the year. 5th grade starts, and there he is. It was show and tell, and he brought a small pet turtle. He was in front of class and took the turtle out and said, "My turtle does tricks. Look, he can break dance." He then put it on its back and spun it like a top. It went flying off the stool onto the hard ground and landed on its shell. He was called Turtle or Turtle Boy the rest of school until he disappeared in junior high. This was in the 80s. I wonder how he turned out. Frickin' weirdo. It sounds like he was trying to be a preteen Ninja Turtle. In high school, a kid had upper teeth like a horse, always out of his mouth and never brushed them. When a teacher was doing roll call and said if we had nicknames or alternate names we wanted to be called, his name was called and he said, "I want to be called Shadow," like an edgelord. He always never did schoolwork and instead watched Pokemon in class and played Pokemon while walking around the halls. He never washed his hands after going to the washroom, and multiple times I heard him moaning in the washroom stalls about different Pokemon and trainers, such as Gardevoir, Lopunny, Leafeon, Misty, Jessie, and a lot more. Every so often you'd see him also choking his chicken in the middle of class while staring at the teacher or some girls in the same class. Got into a fight with someone because he thought he was tough and wanted to show off to a girl. Also, never showered. This was all in grade 12. I'd like to mention as well, I'm not bashing Pokemon, I freaking love Pokemon. He would go around asking people, if you knew an alien that looked like, and he'd give a description, and you really loved them, would you do the deed with that alien? Alien description changed a lot from question to question, and if you answered him, he'd keep asking the questions with different types of aliens. Key point being that you always shared an emotional connection with the alien. Poor kid was just trying to sort out his alien fantasy, I think. This kid in elementary school who had to be the first at everything. And no, I don't mean like super competitive in sports or whatever. I mean he had to be first in line, first in school, first out, among other things. He'd be in front of the school before it even opened to the students, like 6:30 a.m. Class started at 7, waiting for that clock hand to touch 6:30 so he could sprint in and sit first in his class. He would sit near the very front of the class so he could be first in line. He would always, without a doubt, raise his hand as soon as the teacher asked a question to start the class. Most of the time, he didn't even know the answer. The teacher would pick him, and he'd start frantically looking for the answer, or he'd make stuff up. As soon as class ended, he'd sprint across the whole school so he could be the first out the doors. And here's some more weirdness. Every day during recess, he'd always hang out right next to the fence line closest to the school. As soon as the teacher would blow the whistle, he'd be right there immediately. The teacher would tell everyone to turn in their homework from the night before in this basket thing, and he'd grab it and book it to go turn it in first. Problem was, the basket was on the opposite side of the classroom. Remember, he sat up front. More often than not, I remember some poor soul or chair or desk getting in his way and getting trampled. He'd always be the first to finish his tests or quizzes. I never really paid attention to his grades, but I assumed he did fine since he never failed a grade. I remember blazing through a math test. As soon as I stood up to turn it in, he jumped in front of me and handed in his test first. I don't even know if he finished it. That boy had better be a NASCAR driver now. I just realized this was like 20 years ago, and I still remember him in great detail. The weird kid in my year basically started out as a meme. He was odd, socially isolated, talked to himself a little, nerdy, terrible at sports, cannon fodder for the popular crowd. We were, and still are, friends though. Freshman year, a joke starts going around that he should be prom king. No one takes it too seriously, but it's considered funny. French teacher picks it up and supports it. 4 years later, he's been so heavily memed, everyone loves him, and he gets elected homecoming king. Ha! Look at that. Crappy behavior and social isolation leading to what seems like quite a positive outcome. Good for him. I hope his novelty value coasted through to some more tangible friendships. This was in 6th grade. She told everyone she was raised by wolves. She'd draw a paw print on her palm to show as proof, howled during recess, and would growl at the younger kids. There were times when she'd chase around the younger kids, and they looked like they were having fun, so I guess it was fine. But then she'd hide under the playground to meditate, but she was really just peeing herself. Then she'd come back out and continue to chase the kids. She also smelled really bad, like the whole classroom stunk because of her. Teacher pulled her aside a few times and asked her about her hygiene, but nothing changed. He was quiet at first, so me and my friends became friends with him. Months later, he confessed his love to one of them and got rejected, and started stalking us by finding out where we lived, and more to the point, where we had to get restraining orders on him that he kept breaking. This was in middle school, 8th grade. Me and the kid weren't really friends, but were well acquainted with each other as we had a lot of classes together. One morning, yes, early morning, we go to our first class. There were big tables with 2 chairs on each side, so nothing was really separating us. My table was in the back of the room and he sat right next to me. Some time passes and I suddenly hear small but fast movements. I turn to see this kid figuratively whacking the mule next to me. And this wasn't any subtle jerk, this was one of those "I'm in the zone" jerks. I scream and 2 others across from us realize what's happening and they back away as quickly as possible. One just falls out of her chair and starts scurrying to the front of the room. He gets pulled out of class, and a few weeks later, everyone is calling him the math abater, because we were in math class when this happened. Looking back now, it was absolutely hilarious. In high school, our weird kid was a guy who was legally blind but could see general shapes and light. He was obsessed with the idea that he could be a truck driver, constantly made engine noises all the time. He was also grossly creepy towards anyone he thought sounded female. Like would feel people up because he said he didn't know because he couldn't see what he was touching. He did that to a couple of my friends. I was nice to him for a while, but he kept hitting on me because my voice was high, and eventually I dodged him in the halls. I feel kinda bad for him though. Lots of people would just go silent and still if he approached because he was so creepy. I did some low-level parkour to get away from him once. I think he might have been overcompensating for being blind, and I did want to be nice to him. But he was also definitely a low-key predator, because how does the school prove the blind kid is really doing that, and not accidentally brushing them when he was trying to find his way around? Who was the most despicable defendant you've ever seen in court? Defended an old guy, kinda driver who hit and killed a mentally challenged girl who'd run across 6 lanes of traffic against the signal. The guy did nothing wrong. The worst part about the situation was that we were being paid by the dead girl's family insurance company, who the family was suing for benefits. I defended a guy who sent number 2 through the mail to his ex-girlfriend from state prison. I don't know how it got past prison officials, but it did, and he didn't deny sending it. However, we went to trial because he wanted me to argue that the number 2 was expressive speech and thus protected by the First Amendment. We lost. In short, crap case, we lost. I had a brilliant gentleman on probation for narcotics trafficking, and he was not permitted to own or use a cell phone. He went in for a substance test with his probation officer, and his cell phone rang in his pocket. The PO went to take the phone from his pocket and also pulled out a large baggie of white snow that he bought to his substance test. So in my state, if you're in a relationship with someone or had been and you commit certain crimes, they get tagged as domestic violence. This tag gives additional penalties. Long story short, my client received a down-under kiss from a girl and then hit her. We went to trial because the state wanted to say that one beige was a relationship and my guy didn't want to do the domestic violence classes. So we took it to the jury who ruled that one such act isn't a relationship. I've always wondered how many beiges is a relationship. Prior public defender here. Cases involving crimes against kids are the worst. That aside, I once defended a very nice 80-ish-year-old man who'd been married for like 50 years. Several kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids. He'd been charged with indecent behavior with a horse. Turns out, most of the community knew he'd been intimate with livestock for many years, and they'd usually look the other way. But I guess he went too far with the horse. He pled guilty to the felony, but of course got no jail time. It's quite funny that it was acceptable until this man was caught quite literally horsing around, if you'll pardon the pun. I wonder if he had restrained his behavior to simple horseplay, it would have been more acceptable. Although the offense itself wasn't particularly repugnant, I once had to defend someone who had been charged for driving with a suspended license because he was, quite honestly, in his and my opinion, on his way to an AA meeting to prevent himself from drinking. He was a very serious alcoholic who had been convicted of impaired driving several times, and he had found that the only way he could stay sober was by attending AA meetings regularly. On this particular day, his license was suspended because of a prior conviction. He lived quite a distance outside of town, and his friend, who typically drove him into town, cancelled at the last minute. In a panic, worried that without attending the meeting he'd relapse and inevitably end up hurting someone else, quite possibly by driving impaired again, he drove his own vehicle, stone-cold sober, into town. On the way, he was stopped by the police and charged with driving with a suspended license. In court, I wasn't sure whether to tell the judge that despite the delay on the roadside and the laying of a very serious additional criminal charge to this poor guy's history, he managed to call his AA sponsor, who picked him up on the side of the highway and drove him to the meeting just in time to arrive only a few minutes late and stay sober for an additional 24 hours. Albeit with a reduced likelihood of the same positive outcome on the sobriety front the following day. My worst had to be the, quote, gentleman who spent years using his position to commit the unspeakable act. He videotaped it, so we had to watch at trial. We knew the reason he insisted on going to trial was because he wanted to see the video again. A buddy of mine is a defense attorney who takes a lot of murder cases. He said on a few occasions his defendants became visibly excited when the crime scene photos were shown in court. Just, ugh. Immigration law often intersects with criminal defense law, since having criminal convictions will get you banned or kicked out from many countries. In my first year of practicing, I had to argue for a man convicted of a laundry list of awful offenses against his daughters to be allowed into my country, in order to help care for his disabled young step-granddaughter. Reading the details of what he did to his daughters was horrifying. The now adult daughters wrote letters saying they'd forgiven him and had no problems trusting him around their own kids. I just couldn't stop thinking that this guy was possibly going to be left alone with a little girl who couldn't move or talk, let alone defend herself from a serial convict of some of the worst crimes you can do. Another weird one was a guy who had a felony conviction for threatening and planning to kill his previous attorney. He needed to clear up this issue because of a job opportunity in my country. He sent me this bizarre manifesto about the government conspiracies to poison people via tap water and how it was all the fault of the homosexual girly men in powerful positions. I was scared I'd be his next target because he'd clearly had severe untreated mental issues, and all it would take was one lazy or sloppy border officer to let him slip through. No details because of confidentiality. I had to work on a file doing research. The specific issues were whether it was possible to have accidental penetration, basically whether the wrong hole is ever a real thing, and if so, if it could result in tearing the butt and hoo-ha together to make one big unhappy hole. Short answers, apparently yes. Risk factors include inexperience in the bedroom, inebriation, and the dark. And as to the second, yes as well. Apparently there are very rare cases of consensual regular adult fun times doing the same thing. So, I hope that image doesn't hit you at an inopportune moment. Oh, I had a guy stand out of a sunroof and point an AR at an undercover cop. The guy was on probation when this happened. Coworker presented a guy that beat and burned a kitten and recorded it. She had to watch the video and she came to my office crying afterwards. Screw that guy. Not worse, in so much as it was serious, but worse as in, God, do I really have to do this case? One time I was trying to defend a guy that was alleged to have thrown his own wee-wee in a woman's face. The kicker? The guy was an inmate and the woman was a guard at the prison, so it really takes things up a notch penalty-wise. Our defense? Her face tested positive for urea, a substance that is technically in human urine, but is also in an enormous variety of female beauty products. We basically had to argue that she put pee in her own face through one of these products, and they couldn't prove the defendant didn't just throw water on her. I mean, I feel bad for that guard. I wouldn't want someone to throw that stuff in my face. Criminal defense attorney here. I hate doing any adult video or picture cases involving prohibited subject matter. Not only is the crime usually completely reprehensible, but then I have to go and review the discovery myself, which I absolutely hate. Thankfully, haven't had one of those cases in a while. I also hate civil asset forfeiture, but for an entirely different reason. When I get a substance case where the client's assets are seized, not only do I have to deal with the criminal's charges, but I'll also handle the civil asset forfeiture because that's what my firm does. I hate civil laws, but it's quasi-criminal, so I can deal with it. But the whole asset forfeiture scheme is bullcrap. In my jurisdiction, if over 25k is seized, no criminal conviction is necessary for the DA to keep the money, which is entirely backwards. We'll still have the civil trial, but it's by a lesser standard than a criminal trial, as in proved beyond a reasonable doubt versus clear and convincing evidence. There was a movement to reform the asset forfeiture laws, but the DA's association opposed it and effectively killed the reform. Their reasoning being that the DA offices and police departments allocate and rely on asset forfeiture for a part of their budgets, which is essentially admitting that they have a cash incentive to rob people. Ugh, that's some bullcrap that I think is pretty common, sadly. In my country of origin, there was an investigation into police responding instantaneously into speed camera cases as opposed to more important, pressing time-sensitive matters because they were told it would affect their budget. Complete crap. Lawyer who did criminal work experience whilst training. I was part of the legal team that defended a man who killed his partner in their living room. We argued diminished responsibility, as in he was only guilty of manslaughter and not murder, as at the time of the attack he lacked the relevant mental capacity. Jury found against him and he was sent down for 25 years. Last thing he said to me was that he hopes he gets to go into solitary with his guitar and that he'd be better than Eric Clapton by the time he got out. This is a UK case and the client had been in and out of prison all his life, so I assumed that he would know if he was allowed his guitar while inside. I took his word for it, at least. The jury didn't believe that his previous and ongoing psychological problems, well evidenced by expert witnesses, had an effect on his mental state to such an extent that he lacked the mental capacity to commit murder. They believed that he'd committed the act because he wanted to either kill or cause serious physical harm to his partner at the time. This is the men's REA for murder in the UK. No, I don't feel bad about assisting in his case. He was innocent until proven guilty, and in the UK we have equality of arms in criminal cases, which means his team has the same resources as the prosecutions. I said on a case like this once, manslaughter and time served for essentially the same crime, only the victim died in the hospital days later. The defense was able to successfully argue that her poor health contributed more to the death than the beating did. Probably the hardest part was watching the victim's family react to the verdict. I worked a brief stint at the public defender's office during law school. While I took care of a lot of bail hearings and other simpler things. If you spend any time working for the PD, you'll quickly learn the names of the repeat offenders who come in on a monthly, if not weekly, basis. One such fellow, let's call him Stan, liked to do substances. I was informed by the DA's office that he had a warrant out for a probation violation, so I gave Stan a call and told him to turn himself in. Now, as I said, Stan was a regular and knew all of the drills. If you turn yourself in or get picked up after a certain time, you wear your street clothes in front of the judge instead of the jumpsuit. As it turns out, he turned himself in with a smack pipe in his pocket. This can't get any worse, right? Wrong. I'm thinking that Stan has to be the dumbest man to face that courtroom when I looked up and see him being escorted into the courtroom by the bailiff while wearing a shirt that says, "High as F." Let's just say his bail hearing was about as successful as the rest of his life choices. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Public Defender here. This is a matter of public record and I still owe a duty of confidentiality. A client of our office was convicted of attacking someone, defined as a non-consensual physical contact, with motives to the unspeakable act. The alleged victim being a very young relative of the defendant, making it also a crime of domestic. It's by far the darkest case I've been assigned. I can say without reservation that he got a fair shake. I had to defend a guy who was caught in a public park after dark, spanking the mule, with used, dirty baby diapers. The police rolled up on him doing it and shined their spotlight on him, and he looked at them and said, "I have problems." Also defended a guy that walked up to a rival gang member and shot him in the face. Then he and his buddies fled and got involved in a high-speed chase, and he was shooting out of the window at the chasing cops. I had to interview him alone at the downtown Modesto County Jail, which is a total crap hole. It was the first murderer I defended, and I was scared. He turned out to be very polite to me, though. Worst I had was when my client was charged with impersonating a police officer. It was the worst because it was so ridiculous. He was 70 years old and was going to the Social Security office. When he went through the metal detector, he had a police shield that he put in the tray with his keys and phone. He collected police memorabilia and liked to carry it around. The guard at the metal detector arrested him. Oh, that's really sad. I hope this got thrown out and that the old guy didn't get put through too much trouble. Unfortunately, there isn't much detail in the replies to the story. Murder. Started out as a gang initiation carjacking, turned to murder when the juvenile initiate panicked. Juvenile self-deleted at the juvie. Client was torn up as well and wanted to plead guilty. Did a psych evaluation and did a full pre-trial motions practice that lasted a year before we scheduled the plea. He wrote a very heartfelt apology to the girl's dad and I gave it to him after the plea. Still filed habeas against me 2 years later, but that was sort of expected. Another one was doing the worst sort of crimes I've ever tried against his own family. After a vague outcry, police came to the house and recovered evidence from the family's bedrooms in the trash can. Almost got that evidence suppressed because the search was without a warrant, but with permission from his wife. He had previously refused consent, but was led away to the station for questioning. Stories differ as to whether he did it voluntarily or was coerced or even just flat out arrested. And they re-asked for consent from the wife with no husband to contradict her. This one went almost a year as well with a metric ton of motions. In the end, what the police got from the search corroborated the witness testimony to the T, and he eventually decided to plea. But the one that affected me the most was a little kid who literally grew into a man while locked up for 2 cases. 2 cases of aggravated attacks and another case of armed robbery. He stayed in jail almost 3 years while the cases worked themselves out. In the aggravated attack case, he was alleged to have shot 2 lifelong gangbangers due to some dispute. He was a skinny kid, maybe 150 pounds, soaking wet. And these gangbangers were all over 6 foot and heavily built, and a long rap sheet each. Cross-examination on their records went fricking textbook. They each had about 5 convictions, and I asked about the first 3 and then let them hang themselves by saying how they're different now, and how that's all old news, and they don't do that no more. Right. And then you hit them with the subsequent convictions. You wouldn't think that would work, that they'd know their own record and they wouldn't fall for this trick, but they do. Every single time. Not guilty, but still locked up because of the armed robbery. Armed robbery went to trial and we had an expert on eyewitness testimony, Professor Brigham. He was a professor at FSU along with Elizabeth Loftus, the preeminent expert in the field of human memory and eyewitness testimony. He dazzled the jury. Truthfully, I can't take credit for any of this. Not guilty again. A few days later he came to see me at my office. I still remembered a skinny little kid. Not anymore. In street clothes, this guy was built. Somehow I missed all of that, either looking through the partition glass at the jail or being preoccupied with the other stuff in court. We always had a good rapport, so we spent a good hour talking about future plans. That'd be the last time I'd see him, however. A year or so later, he got arrested for murder and is now serving a life sentence. I think that if he had been convicted of some of the other charges, maybe he wouldn't have that murder. Maybe if he'd been away for 5 or 10 years, he could have come out more mature. Not as a 20-year-old jacked-up kid who's been deprived of fun things for the past 3 years. I deliberately kept myself ignorant of the specifics of the murder. Maybe he killed another useless gangbanging psychopath. Maybe he killed a nun. I think it's better not knowing. Worked on a case in which the defendant was accused of decapitating his grandma with a bread knife. Gruesome and scary. Well, really violent cases of the unspeakable act, and by that I mean when the victim was beaten, among other things. They're never easy, particularly because the perpetrators tend to be extreme narcissists who are very angry at women because reasons. Elliot Rodger, the 2014 Santa Barbara killer, is a good example of that type and was much more articulate than most. The narcissism makes defending them a real chore because they tend to be delusional. The victim will never testify. Less creepily, and setting aside sovereign citizens and their ilk, I had a fellow who was dealing smack in a local bar when the cops did a closing check and recognized him as someone whose parole conditions prohibited him from being in bars. He brightly fled to the men's room, a dead end, to flush his dope, but they were right on his heels, so they had him. This frustrated him so badly that he pooped his pants and tried to fling the resulting product at the officers. He was never really clear on why I didn't think this was a triable case. I had a client who was a narco in Colombia extradited to the US. Killed more people than he could count. Actually, lost track. A guy who killed another person in a road rage incident and shot his dog. Strafed bullets across the windshield to scare the guy's wife and then went home and went to bed. I could go on for days. A friend of mine's dad is a defense attorney. He once had a client who strangled a working girl to death because she laughed at him because he couldn't get hard after shooting smack directly into his eggplant. Her dad's half-assed defense was, well, Your Honor, in his defense, he was really high from the smack, so he clearly wasn't thinking. The guy was quickly sentenced to many years in prison. I mean, what else can you say in a case like that? I don't know how anyone can even do a half-assed job of something like that, let alone put any proper effort into defending a guy with so many problematic things going on at once. Takes a different sort of person to work as a public defender, I guess. The 90-year-old woman who routinely smuggled substances in her hoo-ha into prisons was more interesting than most. The gang murderers are pretty routine at this point. As a young lady, it's the ones who aren't killing in the name of territory, street cred, among other things that get to me. I was really affected by a particularly brutal, cold, calculated, sick 30-something man accused of murder. He was eerily calm and cocky about his encounter with an underage girl he met and chatted up for about 20 minutes that resulted ultimately in her drowning with suspicious surrounding circumstances. He was obviously disturbed and it was very unsettling just being near him. Images of him smiling for the news cameras in the courtroom will weirdly pop into my head on a somewhat random basis, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies. The act he put on when he insisted on being put on the stand in a trial ruined him. He would have walked but for his ridiculous testimony. Within seconds, the jury, who'd been paying close attention previously, looked horrified as he told these stories and stopped taking notes. Their minds were made up as soon as he opened his creepy mouth. He was quickly convicted. We did a really stellar job in his case, but he dug his own grave. Justice was served. Copyright defense attorney here. Lots of people have been put through the ringer over BitTorrent downloads in the last few years. My favorite story is not from my client, but from the same case. During one of the first civil BitTorrent file-sharing cases, it became clear to me, and the plaintiff, that one defendant was lying. The guy had erased his hard drive to destroy evidence after receiving the discovery request for the computer. He then reinstalled Windows and named the drive Squeaky. He put it into an encrypting USB enclosure and handed it over. It took them a while, but they figured it out. The guy got hit with a $250,000 judgment for 5 downloads. So the guy was fined $250,000 for downloading 5 items? Like 5 movies or something? That's not justice. You ruin someone's life for downloading a movie. That's totally unbalanced. Okay, I'll pop in. Years ago, there was a silent alarm that went off at the petting part of the zoo at about 3 a.m. Usually nothing, so the cops don't show up lights flashing and guns blazing, so they're walking around taking a look and find a guy on a stool just going at it with a cow. Now, this is one of the most unfortunate-looking human beings you can imagine. Dude is hideous, and honestly, you kind of feel sorry for him and understand that the petting zoo is a logical place, in his mind, to find partners. Cops arrest him and put him in holding. Because of the timing of it all, it was just before a shift change, so every cop working in the precinct has to come by and laugh at the cow puffer. Then they tell the story to all the guys coming on shift, so they all go by and do the same thing. We got an initial hearing that morning, it was a big city. When I tell the judge that story, he throws out the case and tells the guy that he's been punished enough by the embarrassment. A friend of the family is a lawyer who has a favorite story that he likes to tell. Basically, he had to defend someone who just randomly punched a stranger, a 90-year-old grandmother, in the face one day, in front of a dozen witnesses, evidently just because he was in a bad mood. The only defense he could come up to give before the judge was, "Your Honor, he only hit her once." Have you ever interviewed someone and wondered, what is wrong with you? I once had a candidate for an intermediate-level analyst job brag during an interview that he used to work other jobs and play poker, while working his primary office job. For example, for about 2 weeks before he was caught and got fired from all his jobs, he'd take long lunches. No one knew where he went between 10:30 and 1:30. Turns out he'd gotten a job making pizzas at the next-door pizza restaurant and worked the lunch rush. He also bragged about playing poker at work constantly. This was in the late 2000s while online poker was still in its big boom. He bragged about these things to me as if I, a relatively young professional at the time, would think he was cool. Or maybe he thought it demonstrated his ability to multitask and still get his job done. I have no idea. Either way, we did not extend him an offer. Had a candidate come in who said how hot my admin was and asked if she was single or open to Freaky Fridays. What, switching bodies with our teenage daughter to learn a lesson about considering others' points of view and importance of family? No, but the implications were definitely regarding bodies and swapping something. During the interview I asked, "I see you've managed a vegetarian restaurant." "What? It says here you managed a vegetarian restaurant on your CV." "Oh, I guess I did write that." "Not really, though. My girlfriend had an art exhibition and I organized the sandwiches for the opening. They were vegetarian." This was a candidate that was otherwise pretty impressive seeming, and he had been among the favorite candidates for a sought-after position. The interview had gone quite well up until this point. I met him later at a party. He had no memory of me. "Oh no, it was more of a catering firm. I meant to change that. I had someone helping me with my resume and we just put that as a placeholder. But apparently I forgot to change that. I apologize. In fact, it was just me and my girlfriend who started a small catering business, and we did a few jobs, but we realized we couldn't live off the profits and decided to put that idea on the shelf, and here I am now." You see, you've just got to spin these things quicker. Reading replies like the one you've just finished hearing makes me realize that fluent bullcrap really is such a vital interview skill. That's probably why so many other work horror stories we read about seem to get such a wealth of crazy and unqualified people in them. Presumably people who've lied and inflated their small activities into impressive achievements on their CV and talked them up in the interview. This kid, probably 18 to 20, just started picking his nose, like knuckle deep and digging for gold in the middle of his food service job interview. I wrapped that up real quick and didn't hire him. I interviewed a girl once, and while we were talking, I was looking over her resume. Please note that English is her first language, or else this wouldn't have humored me so much. Her mission statement on her resume was as follows: "Along with my detail-oriented and organizational skills, I will encourage team to work cooperatively and creativity to provide and understanding the visual aspects of our work." This was for an admin position at a law firm. Not sure what the visual aspects of our work entailed in this position, honestly. I read that over about 5 or 6 times, worried that I was having a stroke, so I didn't really hear much of anything else she said during the interview. I haven't been able to make sense of it no matter how many times I read it. I actually cut it out of her resume and have it sitting on my desk some 15 years later. In short, she was a lazy liar. Hiring a business intelligence analyst? There are a great variety of ways to get into this profession. I'm open to many of them. Frankly, if you have a good head on your shoulders and know even basic SQL, I can probably work with you, though lately I've had to get more picky as our projects have become more complex. This woman is mid-40s, boisterous personality, and seems like she'd be a good organizational fit. The problem is, she keeps lying, but only halfway. "So, do you know SQL?" "Oh yes, I have years of experience with it." "Great, so take a look at this code. This is the sort of thing we need to do." "What's this?" For some reason though, the most egregious lie that stands out in my head with her was when she commented, when I suggested she not take a particular route to the train station because it was dark and potentially unsafe. Also, I was headed to the same station and did not wish to commute with her. She said that she had a black belt and practiced martial arts for years. "Oh cool, what discipline?" "I don't remember." For frick's sake. We had a shortlisted candidate come up for a campus interview. This usually includes a meeting with the dean, a long interview with the full hiring committee, a formal meeting with the department chair, dinner with the hiring committee, a formal job talk, a 1-hour academic lecture, teaching a simple undergrad course and meeting some students, as well as a campus tour. During the job talk, he kept flashing the pink satin liner of his suit jacket in the direction of one of our openly gay grad students. Everyone noticed. Later, he proceeded to get trashed during the meet and greet with the students at a local bar and confided all of the dirt about his current department and overshared the status of his rocky relationship with a grad student back in his home university, which was a big no-no even though it happens sometimes. The next morning sealed the big fat no. A grad student usually volunteers and is compensated to drive the candidate back to the airport. This person kept trying to persuade the openly gay grad student to drive him instead, even though another student, female, already had the task assigned to her. You know, this guy didn't get an offer. I'll never understand being so confident about this kind of thing that you would go into a really important recruiting situation and behave like this. Honestly, if I'm ever flown out of somewhere for any kind of work, be it interview or otherwise, that's me on high alert and vigilant for the entire journey, apart from maybe weekends. You just can't risk something like that. And yes, it's exhausting. When she listed all of her ex-boyfriends that currently worked there and said she couldn't wait to see the looks on their faces when she showed up to work. This was in the first 3 minutes of the interview, so I wasn't even close to offering her the job yet. I cut the interview right there and sent her on her way. You didn't invite her back for a second interview by a panel of her ex-boyfriends? How did you resist? Honestly, the thought crossed my mind, and in that office it would have been widely appreciated. I set up an interview for an acquaintance's nephew, with the company looking to hire 30 college students for summer work. The nephew's major and the line of work this company performed seemed to mesh perfectly, and I knew the hiring manager personally, so it seemed like a great fit. A couple of weeks later, the acquaintance emails asking about the job. So I hit up my hiring manager friend, and the conversation went something like this. "So, how did the round of hiring go?" HR said, "Great, needed to fill 30 spaces and only had to do 31 interviews to fill them." "Oh, cool. So was Paul one of them?" "Oh, him. Yeah. Well, he was undressed during the interview, so we declined." "What? Are you serious? I find it hard to believe he'd show up to an interview undressed." "Well, it was a Skype interview, and when we brought up his video feed, he was lying in bed in the buck." Well, maybe he thought you couldn't see him? Maybe he thought it was an audio meeting?" "We told him we could see him, and he said, 'Sorry,' and then covered himself up with a sheet. We asked if he wanted to reschedule, and he said no, he was good. So, yeah, we decided to pass. Sorry, Paul." I've had 2 separate cases where people were so confident that they had the job that they botched the interview. On one of these, I wanted to tell the candidate to go out and come back again, because he was one of 2 very good choices and his arrogance put my team off. They thought the other candidate would be a better fit. I've learned this is really important. I beat out a woman for a position who had literally decades of experience on me because no one got along with her. All my coworkers went to our boss and asked her to please not hire the other woman because she's so hard to deal with, even in small doses. They couldn't imagine having her around every day for 8 hours, and our boss listened, I guess, because here I am. I was performing a video interview with a candidate. They were clearly in a large bedroom with most of it visible in the background, but it was clean so I didn't mind. In the back right corner was a closed door. About 7 minutes into the interview, I see the door open slightly and some guy poke his head in, see that his roommate or girlfriend was in an interview and then close the door. Not a big deal, it happens. I asked my next question and let the candidate respond. But then about 30 seconds later, I see the door slowly open again, only this time the guy comes crawling out of the bottom. He continues to crawl across the floor, making his way to the opposite side of the room. I assume he thought he was out of the camera's field of view, but he was clearly visible. He gets to the far end of the room and turns to fiddle with something, butt in the air facing the camera. Finally, he finishes with whatever he was doing and makes his way back and out of the door. I know I should have stopped the candidate and had her deal with the guy, but it was so funny to watch that I had to let it play out. I could barely contain my laughter, and after the interview finished, I lost it. She got the job though, and from what I remember, she was a great employee. Eventually, we did bring it up in the break room. She confessed that she knew what was happening, and she could see the guy on her camera. She was so mortified and embarrassed, but wasn't sure how to react in the moment, so she just ignored it and answered the question. I told her it was one of the most hilarious things I'd seen in an interview. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Hiring for a customer support role. explained to the candidate on pre-interview email how she'd need to sign in at our reception kiosk and register herself, get a name tag sorted, and then the hiring manager, me, would be informed and would come out to the lobby to get her. 15 minutes before interview time, I hear a god almighty jangly noise and see a woman repeatedly trying to open the locked door, and at one point uses her hands to beat the door and wave at people inside. And find out she's the candidate we're meant to interview and she never read the instructions. She lost out on the role there and then, but we still met her for about 10 minutes. We interviewed 3 other people that day and none had problems with interview etiquette. The strangest ever was a man telling us all about his mum's Alzheimer's, talking crap about our company, and getting upset we didn't offer him the position on the spot. It was a wild ride beginning to end. I had someone show up in Daisy Dukes and cowboy boots for an office job at a 4-star hotel. The narrator has now looked up what Daisy Dukes are, and yes, I can now understand that showing up to a fancy hotel interview in a tied-up crop top and denim short shorts may not in fact have been what the establishment was looking for. The people at my last teaching job interview said more or less the same thing, funnily enough. We were looking for a sous chef that would be able to work and train for a few months and then eventually fill my shoes as CDC, as I was leaving in about 6 months' time. We were a big, very successful restaurant in a super competitive city and had a ton of applications and interviews. Most interviews for a chef position include a pretty informal chat with a hiring chef, the owner and the general manager, and a cooking and tasting portion, where the interviewee plans a meal of 5 or 6 dishes and serves them to the interviewers. One guy came in and killed the interview, and served incredible dish after incredible dish, but the owner didn't like him because the guy interviewing was tattoo-less and more than 50 years old, and he felt that this guy's age wasn't conducive to our hip, late-night vibe. Whatever, you do you, Jeff, you insufferable prick. The same owner calls me a few days later and tells me that he's found a guy that he wanted to poach from a small bistro just outside our town. The guy comes in and is super cool, fresh jacket, oozes confidence, and a ton of cooking tattoos. The owner is in love, and I'm hoping that this new guy is into overweight dudes with chef jackets that are 2 sizes too small. Before the interview, all candidates had to send over an ingredients list so that we could order any ingredients that they may need for the cooking portion of the interview. And this guy had requested some foie gras for a dish he said had been awarded time and again, a foie and lobster crepe. Didn't sound very good to me, but I was willing to give it a shot and see how it went. After the meeting, the guy went into our kitchen and started cooking. After about 10 minutes, we all hear the guy screaming at one of our prep cooks to slice him some chives. A few minutes after that, he brings out the app, which he says is his take on shrimp and grits, something that is already on our menu and that he says is better than ours. I point out a few things. The shrimp is overcooked, the grits are gluey, and the chives he was so stressed about weren't even on the plate. He tells me that the problem was that our prep cook didn't speak English, and that when he was chef, he'd make sure the entire back-of-house staff was fluent. Holy crap, warning bell number 1. After 2 more dismal dishes, he tells us that he's going to make his famous crepes. I'm freaking pumped because I know that it's going to be an absolute crap show. The guy is in the kitchen for at least 45 minutes, screaming, cursing, and throwing crap around. I go back into the kitchen to see what the guy is doing, and he's fiddling with the Vitamix, which looks like it's full of cork. I ask him what's going on, and he tells me he's just blending the crepe batter. I point out that crepe batter usually doesn't have the consistency of modeling clay, and he pretty much tells me to F off, and that this dish has won awards. I look over at his phone, which is out on the table, and see that there is a recipe from allrecipes.com for crepes pulled up. So not only does this guy not know how to make his signature dish, but he can't even follow a simple fricking recipe. He brings his dish out, and it's a fricking mess. Burned foie, rubbery lobster, broken béarnaise. The concept sucked, but the execution was somehow even worse. The crepe itself, though, was a culinary abomination. It was as if someone had given a lump of grey Play-Doh a pap smear. I straight up told him this was one of the worst things I'd seen produced in a kitchen, and he pushed back, saying that it would have been great if my staff had given him the support he needed. Despite my protests, we actually hired this guy. The owner thought that he was cool and projected the kind of image we needed. He lasted about a month before I threw his butt out of my kitchen, which the owner never forgave me for. I called the old guy that killed the interview and offered him the job, and he essentially told me to get bent, because he knew he deserved the job in the first place, and he was right. To start the interview, I asked him to tell us, 3 people, a little bit about himself. 35 minutes later, he stopped talking. Usually people answer this question in 1 to 5 minutes. It was incredibly awkward and I was tempted to interrupt him, but then truly wanted to see how long he'd go on. We have a very simple pre-employment test. If you've been in our industry for more than a year, you should get 100%. Sometimes we even give it as a take-home test. We had one guy that took his test home and had it for over a week. He brought it to the formal interview and got 90% of the questions wrong, even though according to his resume he was an all-star and knew everything. He had an excuse for every wrong answer to even the most widely known questions in our industry. It would be the equivalent of saying you'd been laying sod for 20 years and then put the green side down. He didn't get the job. I did a phone interview with a guy and he seemed really excited and very friendly. He seemed to be relatively new to the field, but we were willing to give him a chance. I invited him to come in for an in-person interview. My manager and I were doing this second interview, and when I called him in, he gave me a huge hug and proceeded to talk to me like I was his best friend. As a 27-year-old woman, I was incredibly uncomfortable and froze up. At the end of the interview, we told him we'd reach out to him within a couple of weeks to let him know the outcome. After the interview, my manager asked if I knew him, and I said definitely I did not. His interview was not great either, and he was not a good fit for the job. He proceeded to call my phone every day that week and left me long voicemails. Most of the times he'd ask about his interview, but sometimes he'd say things like, "Hey girl, how are things going? I was thinking if I get hired, we should hang out." It freaked me out, and I had my manager call him early to give him the news that he didn't get the job. The calls didn't stop, and I just kept deleting his voicemails without listening. My manager and I were so disturbed by his persistence that we went to HR for help, and they must have done something because the calls stopped after that. Yuck, that's a boundary problem in every sense of the word and an office creep just waiting to happen. It's an impressive enough problem that HR had to get involved with a party that didn't even technically work there. I was the interviewee. I wasn't feeling well that morning, but I had an interview with a super cool science museum as a promotions event coordinator. It would have been the perfect job. I decided to go to the interview anyway. As I drove to the interview, I felt horrible. When I went inside, I was feeling worse. I was asked to sit and wait for the hiring manager to come and get me. When she finally did, I knew I'd made a mistake in coming in. I got up and followed her across the whole museum up 2 flights of stairs. It felt like it was 120 degrees in there. And finally, as we were walking toward her office and she reached for the door handle, my stomach let go. I barely made it to the trash can right next to me and proceeded to hurl for a good 2 minutes, even dry heaving a few times. When I was finished, I looked up and she had her back to me with her head in her hands, like she was trying to hold it together. I said I was sorry and I hoped she had a better day than me, and I turned around and left. Man, that would have been a fun job. Hiring for an apartment building doorman. He kept telling me that he was just on the phone with Hong Kong putting together a currency exchange transaction and that he was working on another big thing in China. He asked me to wait a few minutes while he finished typing an email. Told me that he was always on the phone. We didn't hire him. I have 2 stories. The first is back in college days. We were interviewing for a new college newspaper reporter. The question was, this position requires an energetic, inquisitive, outgoing person who can chase a story and get the facts. With that in mind, how would you describe yourself? The answer was, fun? Do you care to elaborate on that? No. They didn't get the position. The second story was someone applying for an IT position in my later career. An individual that had been fired from one branch of a government agency decided to apply for another branch a few years later. But his resume read very much differently than the reality. Instead of him being fired for essentially not knowing how to do his primary job function, he was now let go when the project closed, 3 years after he was fired. Also, all of his resume achievements listed for that time were things either myself or one of my co-workers had accomplished, things that he didn't even have any involvement with. I guess he didn't realize we were on the hiring panel because we'd merged with another region. I honestly don't fathom how he thought that was going to work out, because it was the same agency and it's not like we wouldn't have noticed. She cried 3 times during the interview about how much she hated her current job. My coworker had to get up and grab a box of tissues for her. When she finally calmed down, she informed us that she'll need a special desk chair due to an injury she sustained at her current job. And yes, she did have a workers' compensation court case against said job, and she hoped to win big. No one had said anything about hiring her, she just made an assumption that she got the job, I guess. The icing on the cake was that she was interviewing for a workers' compensation job at a firm where we only represent employers, never injured people. While that doesn't influence hiring decisions, talking at length about her current case against her boss was a weird thing to bring up. That and crying. I'm pretty well acquainted with employment and comp law. She didn't get turned down because she had a comp case. Crying 3 times, believe it or not, did the trick of taking her off the callback list. I felt really bad for her, but dude, you can't do that in an interview. I hire student university workers. One of my questions is, tell me about a time at work where you made a mistake and how you fixed it. This kid had no prior work experience, so I modified the question to remove the at work part. I thought he'd tell me about messing up at school or at home. Nope. He told me about the time where he'd ripped his pants in gym class in the 4th grade. He didn't tell me how he fixed the situation either, so I'm assuming his pants are ripped to this day. This kid was a goldmine of what not to do in an interview, to be honest. He didn't get the job. What stupid self-inflicted injuries have you seen that could have been easily avoided? I was a firefighter and we were called to a vehicle fire at midnight in a rural area. We get there and sure enough there's a pickup truck fully engulfed in flames. This wasn't the usual engine compartment fire. The whole truck was roaring. I was the nozzle man at the time on my engine, which meant my job was to be the guy spraying water on the fire. As I got closer to the pickup, I noticed a gosh-awful smell. I was relatively new, so I couldn't place it, but I just knew it was putrid. My heart immediately sank when I remembered there was a missing girl case in our area. People often stash evidence inside cars and then burn the whole thing to get rid of the evidence. Guns, clothes, even bodies. As I'm putting out the fire, I'm dreading what I'll find. Something was in the truck bed. The fact that the truck's owner wasn't on the scene made me more nervous. Fast forward and the fire's out. Turns out the truck bed was filled with a dozen pumpkins. Thankfully, no bodies. But we had no idea where the driver was. A few days later, we heard from the cops that just before we showed up at the fire, a lone guy arrived at the ER with massive, full-body burns. Turns out that as this guy was driving his pumpkins to a nearby farmer's market, he hit something in the road. His gas gauge went to empty and he smelled gas coming from his truck. The hero of this story crawled under his truck to assess the damage and used the only light source he had, a Bic lighter. Someone saw the fire and drove him to the ER. Some separate passerby was the one who actually called in the fire. In short, if you think you have a gas leak, don't use your lighter as your light source. Can't decide, so I'll take 2. Worst injuries: the bikers who thought going 300 kilometers an hour on the German autobahn was a good idea because it's legal. Those ones are too far gone to even be organ donors, at least for the larger parts. The stupidest: the guy who climbed a fence to sneak into an open-air concert. His engagement ring got caught on the top of the chain-link fence when he jumped down, which degloved his finger and part of his hand. It was past 10 p.m., so the gates were open and entrance was free. Pedestrian versus train is always like a bomb went off. My colleague found an enucleated eyeball like half a mile down the track from the majority of the body. Apparently, it was her screensaver for a few years at work. The narrator can't really put his finger on why someone having a photo they took of an eyeball seems so much more sick and twisted a screensaver than, say, a picture that they'd found on Google, which honestly just seems kind of quirky. I guess it's the fact that you know the full tragic story and decided to go, "Okay, I want this on my screen," that seems so morbid. People are weird. Some guy decided kicking a running mower blade that was jammed up was a great idea. He was nice enough to bring his foot in to us, though, in a cooler full of beer. My boss's husband was mowing the lawn and then the blades jammed. Decided to unclog it with his bare hand. He only lost the tips of all his fingers. Too much work to turn it off. Besides, I can just get it out real quick and— oh my god, my hand! There was an SUV full of teenagers driving down the highway in busy traffic. They were driving pretty aggressively. They tried to pass a truck, but the truck is towing a trailer and can't slow down quickly enough to let them pass before oncoming traffic gets close. So they slow down and try to make a second pass. The 15-year-old in the back seat decides to pull his pants down and hang his butt out and moon the other car. Once they passed, they overcorrected and rolled. The kid doing the mooning was ejected and left half his brains and his left arm in a 75-foot line down the middle of the highway. I work in a hospital. There's a lot of stupid crap I've seen. Climbing things and falling off them is a big one. And skateboarding without helmets. I know helmets look embarrassing when skateboarding, but a guy came off his board and was in an induced coma for a week after cracking his head open, for frick's sake. My mom nearly died because she wasn't wearing a helmet while biking. Seeing my dad on his hands and knees, screaming desperately into my mom's ears, trying to wake her up, was the best helmet PSA that 5-year-old me ever got. I met a guy while I was in the hospital ER that was getting out after suffering a stab wound to his leg. I asked him what happened, and he told me that his friend stabbed him with a carving knife. I asked him why he'd do something like that, and he replied, "We were both drunk and decided to see if I could feel it." At least he had a sense of humor about it. My dad is a police officer, and in the first few weeks he was working, he had 2 really bad accident calls. The first one was on a local highway where a guy had lost control of his U-Haul and flipped it. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was ejected. He landed, most likely already dead, and the truck came to rest on his head. Only on his head. The other one was more gruesome. A homeless man was sleeping under garbage when a garbage truck drove onto him trying to get closer to the dumpster. I know this has been said many times, I think even in Deadpool, but he described it as if you ran over a tube of toothpaste. The top popped and the bottom was completely flat. My cousin is an EMT, and he said one of the nastiest scenes he came upon was a car accident in which the passenger had both her legs up on the dash. Airbags deployed, causing severe fractures on both of her ankles, and pushed her knees into her face, breaking her eye socket. He said she was fully conscious when he arrived and in incredible pain. If I remember correctly, she survived and was expected to make a full recovery. He has lots of crazy stories, mostly crystal and drunk drivers though. 25 years in the fire service. Pick one. A. Dropping your smack pipe onto your bed and burning off all your skin and flesh. B. Getting drunk and hitting a tree sideways with your Grand Cherokee so hard that the frame rails met on the other side. Oh, and not being identified for 4 days because all you had was a fake ID. And C. Stopping your truck on the side of the I-95 to pee at 2 a.m. Getting out on the traffic side and getting waffled by a truck. Seriously, fricking drunk drivers. Nothing beats getting out of bed at 1 a.m., spending 5 hours watching the Staties do their investigation, and then going to work on 2 hours sleep. Here's one from within the last year that I didn't have to deal with directly. Some butthole walked into traffic to self-delete at 5 a.m. on 95 in Greenwich, Connecticut. Got himself flattened, but the trucker didn't notice, and the traffic kept running over him until 9. I went over the smear around 6:30 and noticed the clothes everywhere. 4 hours of the NYC commuter rush drove over that guy's carcass. The smear was spread over 3 lanes and 100 yards. People are used to dead deer and some trash on the road. Plus it was early and very dark. A friend of mine told me about a call he had as an EMT. It was for a guy with an ungloved member in a hot tub. Firefighter here. Teenage boy ducked and rolled from a car traveling about 40 miles per hour because a bee got into the car and he was allergic to bees. Holy crap, this is really one of those, you shouldn't have to be struggling not to laugh when you hear this one, and I'm very, very sorry. I can't fault the kid for taking his chances and grazing the crap out of his skin, but surely at that point you freeze in fear and mutter through gritted teeth for the driver to please slow down so you can run for your life. I'm just saying that going from seated and belted to leaping bodily out of a moving vehicle is something that would run against my instinct, even if my allergy, an axe-wielding psychopath, was in the car. My dad was working on these kinds of things in the 1970s. One of the stories he told me was he was called to an early morning accident on the 101 where a drunk driver got an off-ramp and hit another car head-on. Neither the driver nor the passenger in the right-of-way car were wearing their seatbelts. The driver was impaled on the column of the steering wheel, and the passenger was launched through the windshield and then skid on his head, both dead at the scene. And the drunk driver? Totally fine since he was so drunk he basically went ragdoll on impact. A theatre was being renovated. The theatre was designed for a specific show, and that show left after something like a 15-year run. One of the design quirks of the theatre was a concrete basement underneath the stage, where machinery would push up some pretty impressive set changes from below. This meant that the stage had giant open holes in it after all that machinery and stuff was cleared out of the basement. The holes in the stage opened up to a 30-foot drop with bare concrete beneath. The crew who was tearing down the stuff on the stage took some precautions to make sure nobody fell into these holes. They put plywood over the holes and set up caution cones all around them. When they finished tearing down all the stuff from the stage, the last things remaining were those cones and plywood. Someone picked up all the cones, and it was our future patient's job to pick up the plywood. These were long sheets of plywood, too big just to throw over his shoulder. So he picked up one side of the plywood sheet and started walking forward, pushing it along the stage floor. He never even saw the hole he fell through because the plywood he was pushing blocked his view of his own feet. He fell 30 feet and tumbled on the way down, landing directly only on his outstretched hands. He had multiple nasty compound fractures in both arms. Luckily, the shattering bones of his arms broke a lot of the momentum, so when his head smashed down into the concrete, it wasn't going fast enough to kill him. It knocked him unconscious and knocked out all of his teeth on one side of his head. It also crushed and dislocated his jaw. The radial and ulnar fractures were the worst. His hands just hung limply, with gore everywhere and his bones clearly exposed on both forearms. He woke up while we were prepping him for ambulance transport. He mumbled something to us, but his speech was garbled and messed, mostly due to his injury, but also due to the spinal immobilization we put on him, which tucks underneath the chin. He kept mumbling, After a while, I realized he was trying to tell us that his hands hurt. Which makes sense, considering the circumstances. He fell 30 feet onto concrete. He was damn lucky just to have survived. EMS supervisor of a well-known party campus. Of all the calls with completely blotto patients, the winner is a freshman who drank one beer and attempted to slide down the railing of his 4th-floor dorm's stairwell, only to fall 5 stories upside down onto the concrete basement floor, with only his head as a cushion. On arrival, the pool of blood, twice his size, gave me no hope when I reached down to check his pulse. To my surprise, he not only survived his ICU hospitalization, he sat next to me on the first day of organic chemistry a year later. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Thankfully, I didn't see it as our response was over the phone, but we got a call from a car that had done a rollover and no one was responding, so we got police out there ASAP. At some point, a bystander came to the car and said there was no one outside, which is weird because someone had to have been there at some point for it to crash, right? Well, about 10 minutes later, the bystander came back to say he'd found the driver, or at least half of him. We had to call the police back and let them know the driver was bisected at the waist. Later on, the bystander reported he found the torso as well. Bad day to be a good Samaritan for him, I think. Some of the other people in the office were speculating it was a murder cover-up, but he probably just didn't have his seatbelt on. If your car rolls over and half of you is flying out the window, that's something that happens. I was actually just thinking of this the other day. I know a family in my small town that recently lost their son in a car accident. The son and his girlfriend were just driving around late at night on the roads around their farm, and they've driven on them hundreds of times. They got talking or something after he missed a turn, having to swerve and tipping his truck over. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt, so he was thrown out of the window and smashed by the truck, killing him instantly. His girlfriend was wearing her seatbelt and didn't even have a scratch on her. The truck itself was totally drivable. It was kind of dented on the side that it was landed on, but a little buffing out and you wouldn't even know his car was in an accident. But he was killed. Moral of the story, wear your seatbelt. A lesson that the narrator has had thoroughly drilled into him after doing a bunch of these medical videos, and hopefully one that the rest of you will take to heart as well. That and doing any of the other things in these stories. My days of getting tipsy and climbing on things may be done. Responded to a young guy that fell out of the shower when he slipped. He impaled a wooden toilet plunger into the side of his chest underneath his armpit. It was literally halfway down the wood into his body. The guy was standing in the living room when we got there, plunger and all. How he was alive, I don't know. Our mouths were open after going into the home, had to put him sideways on the stretcher in a position of comfort. The poor guy had just been showering. I was skimming and I saw shower, slipped, and toilet plunger and was expecting it to have gone up his butt accidentally. But this was much worse than a colon puncture. I was at work, sitting there with my boss. This guy comes running into our office and cries for help, talking about his friend standing outside. We walk out and see another young man holding his hand covered in blood and missing 1.5 fingers. We of course help him, having a first aid kit and luckily my boss being well taught in first aid. He then got transported by helicopter. But the interesting thing is how he got the injury. Apparently the guys were having a barbecue and took a circular saw to cut open their buns. I did this so often before, it never went wrong. I later learned they were able to save at least one of his fingers. The worst injury I've seen caused by something stupid was a man who crashed into a tree on the side of the highway. He had a nice gouge in his scalp and totaled his car. The reason he did this? He imagined the exit was about half a mile earlier than it was and tried to merge off into the grass. He was also high as frick on whippets. Really strange to find an entire box of NO2 canisters in someone's passenger seat and an empty whipped cream dispenser, which is the stupidest substance I can think of besides huffing paint. I nearly had a similar diversion from the I-75 through Atlanta when someone threw a glass bottle out of their window and it flew into mine and cracked me across the skull. Fortunately, it was late at night, so there was no traffic and I didn't hit anything when I lost control and spun out onto the shoulder. I had to get 5 stitches, and I've still got a nasty and very visible scar to this day. I missed one of those big steel poles that holds up street signs by about a foot, so yeah, someone else littering almost killed me. Not my story, but one that my paramedic dad has told me a couple of times. A lady was standing under a massive oak tree in her yard after a nasty storm damaged it. One of the limbs, as thick as a trunk on a normal street tree, was cracked and this lady was just staring up at it, trying to figure out what to do when it broke off and crushed her. Apparently, it absolutely pancaked her torso and head, but left her limbs just fine. My dad describes it as exactly like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Dudes too neglected, underfed, unneutered large pit bulls were fighting over the unspayed female dog. Dude stepped into the middle and had his bottom lip entirely removed to the gum line. He was also on a lot of blood thinners. He then pulled his concealed carry weapon and shot the dog, hitting it in the stomach. I felt so bad for that dog for being owned by a freaking moron. It's his fault the dog died. I picked the guy's lip up off the ground and packaged it for transport. He bled all the way to the level 1 trauma center an hour away. We ran out of absorbents and had to use QuickClot to get the bleeding stopped. Blood was running out the back of the ambulance. Former paramedic here, I saw a man lose his life after falling 12 feet. 12 feet ain't that high. But when you land wrong, instant death. If you work at any height, wear a harness. I always like to remind people the average human is just tall enough that if they stand up straight and fall rigidly forward or backwards onto solid cement, they will gain just enough energy to impart a likely lethal blow. Apply this to things like curbs or other small surfaces and it's no contest. That's how freaking fragile we are when it comes to gravity, people. My mother was a police explorer in the 80s. She later went on to being a 911 dispatcher. She had to do a ride-along as part of police explorers or dispatch training, I can't remember which. The town she lived in has lots of gravel roads. On a blistering and muggy Iowa summer, the ambulance gets called to a motorcycle crash. They'd been speeding down the gravel and he was wearing shorts, sandals, and no helmet. He was literally pasted across the gravel, which acted like sandpaper. His head was split wide open and his brains were scattered like a Gallagher show, and the smell is something my mum says she can still smell when she tells the story. Gently cooking brains in gravel mixed with the road dust and raw meat smell. Didn't help that it was super humid, too. The girl riding with him lost 80% of her skin and broke basically everything. She died in the hospital before her parents got there. My mum made me swear to never ride motorcycles. Riding leathers aren't a freaking fashion statement. So unless you want to force some traumatized 20-year-old to scrape your face meat off the road with a garden spade, wear the proper riding gear and helmet. I'm a medic. A kid de-skinned his sausage while peeing by aggressively pulling his zipper up after he was finished. Oh god. Excuse the narrator, he's just going to narrate with his legs crossed and try not to think about the immense amount of second-hand pain that reading, writing, and narrating that last sentence caused him. Owie, 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 owie. My father-in-law is a firefighter, but the area mostly just has car accidents. So many people have their lives ruined by speeding or driving drunk. So many. I'm a cop. About 4:45 in the morning, we get a call of a burglary in progress. Now, we get off at 6:30 and have a whole night of paperwork to do right before we go home, so we weren't exactly stoked to do this. Anyways, I get there first and the 2 occupants come running out and say a guy was trying to break in and smashed a window to do it. So they ran. I'm thinking active burglary in progress, so I get my buddy rolling code 3 in case this turns sideways. We get the house surrounded and decide, well, screw it, we've got to approach somehow. We look through the fence and see what looks like a person laying on the ground. We make entry into the backyard and sure enough, there's a person laying on the ground right by the rear door. Only now we can also see the shattered glass and massive amounts of blood. We push into the backyard and the guy is clearly dead. Medics on scene confirm it. After further inspection, we realize that this clown broke the window and sliced his arm deep, right where your bicep meets your forearm. He then walked from that location to the rear door and tried to enter there for a long time by how much blood was pooled on the ground and on the door. He ended up dying, face up, spread-eagled right by the door. The homeowners had no idea who he was. I ended up going home before the whole thing was wrapped up, and I never got confirmation as to anything. But our best guess was that this knucklehead was so high on crystal that he thought that this house was his and ended up smashing the window trying to get in when he couldn't open the door. He cut himself and just died. 911 call for a guy with abdominal pain. We find out the guy had shoved an egg up his butt for bedroom reasons. After he'd concluded his act of self-love, he couldn't extract the egg. He grabbed a spoon and tried to break the egg to get it out. This really happened. The guy just cut himself up real bad trying to get in there and eventually died from complications. A guy wanted to see what a ring on his eggplant felt like, so he used his wedding ring. Couldn't get it off and was ashamed to ask for help until it started turning black and blue and was in extreme pain. Either dude has giant hands or a gosh darn spaghetti wang. I'm not a first responder, but this reminds me of that one YouTuber that stuck his head in a microwave and then filled it with cement. Like literally, what did he expect? Did he even know how cement works? That it hardens? Anyways, it was a waste of time for the first responders in my opinion. Had that guy been smarter, the first responders could have actually saved a life of someone who actually needed help rather than someone who self-inflicted this idiocy upon themselves. Personally, speaking as a stupid person, I nearly cut a chunk out of my hand because I was cutting carrots on a mandolin without using the guard. I still have the scar and I haven't touched the darn thing since. What's the rarest disease you've seen a patient correctly self-diagnose? Subarachnoid hemorrhage. My guy straight up walked up to the desk and said, "I've got a headache out of nowhere. I think it's one of those spider hemorrhage things." We didn't take him seriously until the CT scan came back. To be fair, he was walking fine, talking fine, and didn't have any light sensitivity. Said the pain was a 5 out of 10. The guy could just handle pain really well. Because I have some people asking, we ended up transporting him to another hospital. We were small and not equipped for all that. We took him via ambulance to a larger hospital and was met outside the ambulance bay, and he was taken directly to the surgery unit. I saw him like 6 months later in a store and he had a bit of a stutter. I would say that it was the allergy to meat after being bitten by a Lone Star tick. It was a young kid, maybe 8 to 9 years old. He would only eat tacos per the mum's instructions. He had tacos that night and had no other foods that day out of the norm, nor new medicines, lotions, detergents, shampoos in his routine. He had urticaria, hives, up and down his arms. Mum did recently remember pulling a tick that didn't look like a deer nor dog tick out of him and felt it looked like a Lone Star tick. I had no better diagnosis for the lady and referred her son to an allergist. I'd never heard of this allergy before the mum told me about it. I worked at a pediatric clinic and we had a mum properly diagnose her 9-month-old baby with Tay-Sachs disease. He wasn't progressing developmentally and ended up passing away at 18 months old. I'm actually very freaking jealous of all these doctors whose patients are helping out with the diagnosis. Mine are all just saying, "I have chest pain in my toe when I go number 2. I had an 11-year-old girl who didn't move her bowels for a week. A week! Told me she thought it was her girl parts that weren't working properly. After a full workup and finally a CT scan of her abdomen and pelvis, which I hate doing on kids because of the level of radiation, I found out her uterus was so full of blood it was causing full-on bowel obstruction. Her girl bits were so imporforate or closed up that she couldn't menstruate and all the blood just stayed in her uterus. She required an emergency hymenectomy and was sent home the next day. Hot damn if she didn't call it from the get-go. Scurvy. Why he didn't just start eating foods with vitamin C, I'll never know. That was right up there with diseases that I just didn't think people got anymore. The old pirate disease. Classic. Just goes to show you that some kids do not want to eat their fruits and vegetables, and some parents sadly can't be bothered making them do so. Although the replies to this story were full of college-age students actually getting the same disease from only eating cup noodles, so I guess it could just be a really irresponsible adult as well. When my oldest was born, he peeled a little, like babies may do, but it kept getting worse and he was flaky and had scales. The pediatrician told me he had dry skin and to lotion him up. Dr. Google claimed it was a condition called ichthyosis, but that was super rare, so no one believed me. Anyways, fast forward 6 months and a referral to a dermatologist later, and he's got ichthyosis. Also, after my first was born, I had excruciating pain just under my ribcage, mostly after I ate. Tums did nothing. Gas X did nothing. Did a little Googling and it sounded like gallbladder attacks, only it's on the wrong side. I go to my GP, get an ultrasound. My gallbladder was full of stones. Got a referral to a surgeon who dragged me for a month, claiming it couldn't be my gallbladder, the pain was on the wrong side. Meanwhile, I was having attacks after every meal and stopped eating except ginger ale and club crackers. I lost over 10 pounds. Call the surgeon daily in tears. Finally, he agrees to operate, but right before the procedure tells me that once my gallbladder is gone, I'll still have problems. Woke up from surgery and found out my gallbladder was worse than they thought, so it needed to come out anyway. 2.5 years later and I haven't had any more attacks. Guess it was my gallbladder after all. Bird mite infestation. The lady wasn't taken seriously at first and came off as a psycho. Nope, the birds built a nest in her AC ductwork. Patient here. Self-diagnosed a still unknown fungal infection inside both eyes. It took making them glow with a rock lamp to get attention. Kept seeing strands in both eyes, then wow, that UV lamp. Ended up on one heck of a cocktail to save my sight. Kids, don't wash your eyes with river water in a tropical rainforest. Just say no. A nurse friend brought her newborn to the pediatrician in '63 and told him her son had Wilm's tumor. The guy blew her off and told her she was a nervous mother and a little bossy boots. The kid was starting to crump when a pediatric oncology guy noticed and saved the baby. My friend dumped the pediatrician. A patient turned up clutching some internet printouts about visceral leishmaniasis. Luckily, I managed to resist saying anything sarcastic as that's exactly what she had. I appreciate it's not uncommon worldwide, but in UK hospitals it's pretty damn rare. And I was grateful for the printouts, it saved me a lot of searching. As a physician and a med school doctor, it's pretty distressing to read all of these. I told the doctor I had, enter the fairly common disease and typical symptoms here, but he or she didn't believe me. We teach our med students to ask the patients if they have any idea what they may have. Doctors need to take the patient's opinions seriously. Much of the time, the patient has already spent hours researching the disease and may have some experience with it, especially if it's a familial disease. I may require my students to listen to these stories. I'm not a medical worker, but my grandmother self-diagnosed herself with Chiari. She had been having problems and everyone in the family tried to tell her it was nothing. She ended up needing brain surgery and still suffers from it. I had a resident tell me a patient was in the ER saying he had a worm in his eye. Why does he think that? I asked. Because he feels something in his eye. I patiently explained to the resident that often people have a speck of dust, so you just have to look carefully all around the eyelids under the slit lamp, which has a microscope. As I was talking and examining the patient, lo and behold, a worm wriggled right under the surface and I jumped back and nearly fell off my chair. It turns out the patient was visiting from Africa and his father was a veterinarian, who told him to come to the hospital to take the worm out. These parasites are common in Africa, not so much in the US. The entire infectious disease department was very excited. Years ago, a woman who'd been taking calcium supplements made from ground horse bones diagnosed herself with lead poisoning. I recall she was a movie actress. Impressive in that I think none of her doctors saw this, and there was at the time no reason to believe that a calcium supplement would have a lot of lead in it. But of course animals store lead in their bones, and until leaded gasoline was phased out, every animal pretty much was getting very high exposure. I have to add an editorial comment about lead and mercury. The counter-argument I've heard when I expressed concerns about exposure from fish and gasoline is that, "You're gonna die anyway, you could be hit by a bus." I'm puzzled to the point of anger by such stupid responses. Is the argument since you can be hit by a bus, you should not try to avoid being poisoned? Especially since the result of neurological damage is not sudden death or even death at all, but rather a sometimes hideous diminution of quality of life. Who would say, sure, take off 10 IQ points, I might be hit by a bus. Sure, that makes sense. 5th year med student here, diagnosed myself with lymphoma. Everyone thought I was being a classic paranoid med student, but it turns out I was right. Finished chemo 2 weeks ago. I would imagine that just simply learning of all these completely horrifying ailments could make anyone a hypochondriac. Good on you for staving off the self-doubt and working out what was really going on. Not particularly rare, but I had a guy diagnose himself with Guillain-Barré syndrome and a lady diagnose herself with Charcot-Marie tooth disease. I worked in a health department for a while looking at infectious diseases. Two things seemed constant. 1. The vets are really good at self-diagnosing zoonotic diseases. 2. Their doctors rarely believe them. In my time, we saw two uncommon diseases: psittacosis and tularemia. Vets are well trained anyway, but to be fair, it's a pretty obvious leap from "I treated a dog with X" to "oh, now I have X too." The psittacosis was from some kind of exotic bird and had infected the owner. The owner had already had a cough when visiting the clinic, and the vet recommended that the owner see her GP. But the GP refused to order the tests until the patient was extremely sick. If I recall correctly, the lady survived, but a lawsuit came from the ordeal. No idea how it ended. Bird survived too, I believe. A different vet herself got tularemia, treating a stray cat that was brought into the clinic. To be fair, it's very rare in cats as well. The cat sadly died despite treatment. The vet's GP was not convinced she could have contracted the disease so quickly. The health department had to intervene and insist the vet get treatment. I honestly have no idea why anyone would flat out deny the possibility when a known exposure is present. ER physician here. I once had a patient, a middle-aged man, who self-diagnosed a glioblastoma multiforme. It turns out he'd been having headaches, nausea, blurry vision for about 6 months. He didn't seek medical help until a couple of weeks before I'd seen him. At first he was treated with simple NSAIDs and rest, but was ordered a full set of tests. Between visits to his primary care physician, he saw an episode of the television series ER, where one of the characters had similar symptoms and was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme. So when he came to the ER, because he developed dysarthria and a persistent headache, he bluntly said he might have this particular disease. Obviously, I didn't believe him since glioblastomas are not very common and television is fantasy. Well, after the MRI scan showed it had that particular brain cancer, I couldn't help but marvel at his self-diagnosis. But deep down, I wish he was completely wrong, because glioblastoma multiforme is one of the most aggressive brain cancers there is, with an extremely low survival rate. When I told him about his diagnosis, he didn't get angry or sad, just said it was okay. He knew it all along and was at peace with his immediate future. I followed up on him for some time and he died 3 months after my visit. It was one of those weird circumstances that, in my line of work, makes you think that there's something bigger than us all around us. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a patient who correctly diagnosed herself with mastitis, although she was very worried that she had had an inflammatory carcinoma of the chest. To be fair, they can look similar. Another time, I had a patient correctly diagnose a lump in her breast as a fibroadenoma. I was very impressed. Man, I got a giant abscess, and everyone kept coming to look at this giant, pus, blood-filled bubble on my chest. No one had ever seen mastitis go this wrong before. Stupid family doctor made me suffer and ignored me for ages until I ended up in the ER. The nurse admitting me was like, "How long has this been going on?" To be fair, it only grew and became crazy that morning. But the lump I had would not go away no matter what I tried. Is it just me, or are doctors sometimes like, "A totally abnormal thing going on with your body? Let's run some tests." Unless it's on a lady's part, in which case it's just a lady mystery. Probably hysteria. Oh, it's not just you. They've done all kinds of studies. I went into the ER in severe pain and was sure it was kidney stones. I told the nurse that and got a long lecture on how I do not self-diagnose, just tell the doctors my symptoms and let him figure it out because he's the professional. The doctor comes in, I describe my symptoms, leaving off my ideas on the matter, and they do some blood and pee tests. The doctor comes back and it turns out I did have kidney stones. I looked at the nurse, who happened to be in the same room at the time, and she just huffed and walked out. The doctor looked confused and I told him the whole story. He laughed and said something to the effect of course patients should tell me what they think the issue is and why. I may not come to the same conclusion as you, but every bit of data helps. Not quite the same, but this was so creepy and sad I had to share. One of my dad's co-workers went to pick up a patient with the ambulance, and they started talking during the drive to the hospital. The patient told the co-worker that he had a very special type of cancer, and started listing his symptoms. Co-worker thought to himself, well crap, this sounds like a lot of the issues I've been having, and decided to get himself checked out. It turns out he had the exact same type of disease, and died a few months later. Damn sad that even catching it ahead of time didn't help the guy in question here. I don't even know if it's silver lining that they got a few months to sort out their estate. Honestly, I'd rather not know and then cark it one day without living in dread. But maybe it wouldn't have been that simple either. It's not rare or a disease, but it always terrifies me when a patient says they're going to die and then later actually freaking dies. We had a girl say this and then later die from a PE. She was young too. Just so we're clear, this girl died within 45 minutes of predicting said death. She was unloaded from the gurney after being brought into the ER for difficulty breathing and started complaining of back pain once on the bed that was brand new for her. Then 45 minutes or so later, we pronounced her time of death. The nurse was traumatized because this young girl said it with such conviction. We later found out this girl was on birth control pills and figured it was the reason she threw a clot. Sad day, man. I should probably leave this here. How often do blood clots occur? Blood clots are generally rare but sometimes occur in otherwise healthy people, even those not taking CHCs. Between 1 and 5 of every 10,000 women who are not pregnant and not using CHCs will experience a blood clot in any given year. This number increases slightly if the person uses CHCs. Between 3 and 9 of every 10,000 CHC users will experience a blood clot in any given year. This girl might have had a bunch of other risk factors for a PE as well. Possible long periods of immobilization, recent surgery, trauma, who knows. The only risk factor I caught wind of was birth control pills. It's something providers in the ER typically ask about if a female comes in complaining of dyspnea with no history of respiratory problems. I work in pain management and a lady had symptoms that other doctors didn't believe. She was labeled as a substance addict or someone seeking narcotics. She came to our office in tears, just telling me she felt pain in random places of her body with no abnormal imaging or other symptoms. She stated several times that she felt she had something inexplicably wrong with her and that she wasn't lying for pills. We discovered she has a very rare case of chronic regional pain syndrome, more severe than any other case we'd seen. Sadly, there's no cure, but at least she has an explanation as to why she has pain for no evident reason. Not a medical worker, but I am a rare case of WebMD being right about cancer. Felt a lump in my throat for upwards of a year and a half, but doctors kept telling me it was in my head. They stuck cameras down my throat and nothing. It took an ultrasound after giving myself up and my PCP saying my thyroid felt slightly enlarged for a doctor to find it. One ultrasound and a biopsy later, they found out I had stage 2 papillary thyroid cancer that metastasized to 18 lymph nodes. Myself with lupus. Been having issues with chest pain and a myriad of other symptoms that never made sense together. GPs don't want to look at the mountain of records they have for you, just the problem at hand. All tests for a diagnosis came back in normal parameters, but I insisted on a fail-safe I'd read about. I asked to be tested for syphilis. But you have no symptoms for that. I know. It's because lupus will show as a false positive on that. Done, and I have lupus. I also diagnosed myself with lupus. Went to 2 doctors and they didn't believe me. I was 16 and they claimed I had the teenage blues or it was anemia symptoms. Finally went to a 3rd doctor when I couldn't go on feeling like crap any longer. Turns out I was in stage 4 kidney failure from lupus and they were like, yeah, you need to see a rheumatologist tomorrow. Pyloric stenosis. A couple brought in their little one with exorcist-type projectile vomiting. Exam and ultrasound confirmed the diagnosis. My daughter had this. I didn't diagnose it though. The doctors kept telling me there was nothing wrong with her and she was just spitting up, even though she couldn't keep anything down. I finally took her for a 3rd opinion and there it was. The doctor said the other ones probably didn't diagnose it because it's rare for girls to have it. She had surgery the next morning and she's fine now 15 years later. Found out later that a bunch of relatives, all girls, have had this. My older brother is developmentally disabled. For the longest time, all the psychologists and school counselors said he was ADHD and had some learning disabilities that he may have obtained in utero. My badass mum, with only a high school diploma, never really accepted that this was all that was going on with him, but listened to the doctors anyway. Fast forward to when my brother was 10 years old and my mother read an article about Fragile X syndrome. She happened to read about a rare form of it called Frax-E. The article perfectly described my brother's condition. My mother then decided to talk to a genetic counselor about getting my brother tested. The genetic counselor kind of scoffed at her diagnosis but went along with it anyways. Lo and behold, my brother had the exact form of Fragile X she had read about. My mum not only diagnosed my brother, but she also found out that our family was a carrier for Frax-E. It turned out my mum was a carrier and my grandpa had Frax-E. It was amazing because all my grandpa's life he fought with feelings of inadequacy because school and learning new things were really hard for him. He was held back 3 times in high school. When he found out there was a legitimate medical reason for this, it completely changed his outlook. We had a 20-year-old patient come into the hospital because his girlfriend was laying on his chest and told him his heartbeat was a little fast and sounded weird. He came in and said he had an irregular heartbeat or arrhythmia. According to his Google research, he said he may have AFib. He was correct. While watching a documentary about Asperger's during class, I had a portent and slow realization that what they talked about was disturbingly accurate on a personal level. After running through some screenings, months later, because diagnosis screenings are far more focused on children than adults, the doctors were wondering how it managed to be undetected during my childhood. I actually think a lot of people who are on the spectrum on some level probably go through life completely unaware of it, just due to a lot of pressure while growing up to repress or ignore their more neurodivergent tendencies rather than diagnose and treat them. And it was even worse for the people before our generation too. Not really a rare disease, but when I worked in the district hospital, I had a patient who came in for a 3-day fever saying that she might have hepatitis A because she had some shellfish over the weekend. She had no other symptoms. I laughed it off. Her full blood count did seem to indicate a viral infection, but I was thinking of dengue, which is a very common thing in that area, or just your run-of-the-mill viral fever. Fearing the former, I scheduled her to come on Saturday, 3 days later, to review her dengue antibodies test result. It so happened that I was working half-day that Saturday. It so happened the lady was yellow on that Saturday, jaundiced from the hepatitis, and the IgM came back negative. Boy, was I humbled. She was hospitalized in a tertiary center and came for a follow-up a few weeks after, and she was fit as a horse. I knew a guy who diagnosed himself with appendicitis within 1.5 hours of the symptoms appearing. It was very impressive for someone with no medical expertise. Rarest diseases are often easier to self-diagnose than medically diagnose, as the patient will jump to the worst conclusion with no data, and the doctor will start at the most likely and test down from there. I had a guy come in one night and diagnose himself with a broken tibia. Wasn't as impressive as it sounds, as it was sticking through his skin. I correctly self-diagnosed my hypochondria. I diagnosed myself with a condition called hidradenitis suppurativa. I've struggled with it for 25 years. Been to several doctors who just threw a 2-week antibiotic at me and told me to come back if it returned. When I asked why I was having one of these flare-ups, they usually just shrugged and said I was just one of those people who were prone. I was never given a diagnosis. I started really looking into it about a year ago and went to a new doctor where I explained in detail why I believed I had the condition. After examining me, she agreed and has been wonderful in helping me treat this, with practical remedies and an open mind and listening ear. So glad that I found her. I self-diagnosed myself with allergy to carrot antifreeze protein. For some years, after eating raw carrots or having fresh carrot juice from the fridge, I was experiencing a tingling sensation in the throat and I could feel it swelling. At some point I realized I was allergic to carrots, but only to the raw ones. The weird thing was that this wasn't always the case. I sometimes had raw carrots and had no symptoms at all. The cooked ones were fine. Then about 8 to 10 years ago, I watched a program in which they mentioned that carrots can produce a natural and, at the time, only plant antifreeze protein. Carrots make it in response to excessive cold. They also said that some people may be allergic to it. This protein is also broken down while carrots are cooked. This struck me as, that's it! So I did some tests. I can happily eat raw carrots that have been pulled out of the ground with no symptoms. However, raw carrots that have been in the fridge for some time will give me narrowed and itchy throat. What is the most disturbing thing you've overheard a parent tell their kid? Heard someone get really mad at their kid, who was 7 or 8, in the grocery store, and they screamed, "This is why your dog ran away. He hated you." Like, geez, lady, chill. I wish you were never born. In a grocery store after a small child was acting up. I was leaning against a telephone pole at a bus stop, just waiting for a friend to meet me there and then walk to my place. A woman and a little girl were sitting at the stop when a car pulled up. The lady stands up and looks at the little girl and says, "If I'm not back in an hour, call your grandma and tell her I said for both of you to get out of this town and disappear." Then she got in the car and it drove off as my friend came around the corner. I dated a girl in high school who was adopted. One day I was at the mall with her and her mother when they started fighting and her mother yelled, "Well, now I know why your mother put you up for adoption." It was pretty much the worst thing I've ever heard. This guy I dated had an adopted sister and his mum said the same stuff. She called her a little hussy as well. I was helping my dad fix one of his rentals. The toilet was plugged up, and we found out that it was clogged with numerous action figures. My dad asked the renter's child if he was the one who put them in the toilet. To my surprise, he admitted it completely and apologized. Immediately, the renter dragged her kid by the arm into another room. We could hear everything said, which should have been obvious to her. She said, "Don't you ever betray you or yours again. If someone asks you if you did something like that, you say no. You understand me?" Ugh. Not me, but my mother. At the elementary school we worked at, there was one mother who constantly bullied her son, including pinching him over the slightest things, blatantly favoring his siblings over him, and making him walk to school in the rain. My mum reminisced how she rarely saw the kid being happy. One afternoon during my mum's parent and bus pickup duties, she observed the kid's mum picking him up from school and yelling at him. As usual. Through tears, he asked his mum why he couldn't just go live with his dad. "Then you don't even have to see me anymore. Why can't I go stay with Daddy?" And her answer? "Because he wants you," before slamming the door and driving off. I still don't understand how that woman never lost custody of him. "Out of all my children, you are the biggest disappointment." Oof. I sincerely hope you were listening to Lucille Bluth, because that's the only person with whom that statement has any chance of being remotely funny from. And even then, only if she was talking to Job. But seriously, that's freaking tragic and probably broke a kid. Not really public, but when I was in high school, I was at my best friend's house hanging out. He got in an argument with his mum and she got so teed off that she said, "I honestly wish I didn't have to put up with your bullcrap. You're only here because of divorced whoopee." Meaning he was conceived when his parents did the deed after their divorce. I was sitting there in stunned silence as she storms off. My friend just starts laughing as if it's the funniest thing he's ever heard. He would even proudly tell people that he was here because of divorced whoopee, with this big grin on his face. Just had this happen today. Hold the dog's leash or I'll strangle you with it. This was said by a father to his 5-year-old kid. The dog was a youngish-looking German Shepherd. My son has hydranencephaly, and his head is a little larger than normal because of a buildup of CSF fluid. Once at an appointment, a kid in a wheelchair, probably 5 or 6 years old, said quietly and innocently to his dad, "Look at that kid's head." And his dad replies, "Don't talk about him, you're in a wheelchair." Now, I'm all for parents using my son as a teaching opportunity to break stigma on special needs kids, or educate their kids on how to speak politely, say hi, or ask a polite question about special needs people, but I was shocked that this kid's dad said that to him. Don't make me regret not going to the clinic. We were getting in line to get ice cream when I noticed $20 on the ground. I asked if it belonged to anyone. A middle-aged woman and a teenage girl, presumably her daughter sitting near us, noticed. The mother nudged the daughter and said, "I think that's yours." And the daughter didn't even look away from her ice cream and said, "No, it's not." The mother presses on, saying, "Are you sure? I think it is." This back and forth continued. Clearly it isn't hers and the mother wants her to take the $20 anyway. Eventually the kid gives up and agrees, saying she thinks it's hers. Taking the $20 wasn't what bothered us. It was insisting your daughter do the wrong thing even when she clearly doesn't want to lie. I overheard a father shout, "Stop crying. Why do you always have to make everything about you? Everything is just the worst thing ever, isn't it?" At his hysterical toddler. Today. If you get hurt, you're in trouble. If you get in trouble, I'm gonna hurt you. The other day, the couple that lives in the apartment downstairs from me were outside trying to get their kids to be quiet and get in their car seats. But they were crying and arguing. The dad was going on with the "shut up, stop crying, stop yelling" stuff, but it was only making them worse. Then the mum really calmly walked over to the door and said, "I'm tired of you two fighting. I don't want 2 kids anymore. If this is what having 2 kids is like, I don't want 2 kids. I'm giving one of you guys up. You'd better decide which one of you is staying." That shut them up though. I should clarify that when I say it's disturbing, it's only really messed up out of context, and I kind of understand why she'd say that. Honestly, I thought it was pretty funny. Was at a ghetto CVS, and a parent told her child something along the lines of, "If you keep crying, I'm going to pull out a piece and shoot ya. If you don't shut the frick up, I'm going to beat the crap out of you." This was on base, and the man was yelling into his car. I'll always regret not calling the cops. A father telling his preteen daughter how she was going to grow up to be a hussy just like her mother. She couldn't have been more than 11. On the train around early December last year, I overheard a father shouting at his couldn't have been much older than 6 son and threatening him with, "Santa won't bring you any presents if you keep acting like a little crap bag." To which the kid replied, "How can you make Santa do that?" And the father, kneeling down to make eye contact with his son, said, "I'll wait for him to come down the chimney, and then I'll punch all his fricking teeth out, that's how." I'm sure the son loved both Christmas and his dad after that. My fiancé and I were at dinner last year, and we were seated next to this really bizarre-looking family. It was busy and tables were jammed close, so we heard everything they said. The daughter had to have been around 13 and was carrying a little kid's stuffed animal and holding it the whole time. The mum wouldn't let the daughter order what she wanted and started body-shaming her kid, who was skinny but clearly going through puberty, telling her how disgusting and fat her hips were starting to get. Mum, by the way, was morbidly obese. Of course. So the girl ended up having to split a salad with her dad, while her slightly older brother had like 3 plates full of food sat right in front of him. What do you even do when you witness unfolding childhood traumas like this taking place right in front of you? This is actually mortifying, and I would love to know in the comments, even if I never end up running into any of it myself. I heard one of my old neighbors say to her son, "If you keep crying like a little B-word, I'll put you in a dress. You want to wear a dress? No? Then shut the F up." I was outside gardening with my daughter, who was about 6 at the time. Her eyes just went wide and she asked me why she would talk to her kids like that. I didn't really have a good answer. I was at Kroger browsing through an aisle. 2 young men were there with an older man, I'm guessing their father. One of them was talking about how he beat the crap out of his girlfriend recently and how he felt like a terrible person about it. The older gent put his hands on his shoulders and says, "Son, boys will be boys." I always tell my 1-year-old I'm going to give her a knuckle sandwich if she whacks me with her maraca again. Then she laughs and donks me on the head with it. Threatening to bite her little toesies off doesn't work either. "Stop mucking about, you little C-word, or I'll frickin' thrash ya." A mother talking to her child while walking them to school in front of all the other kids and their parents. This was in a low-income neighborhood in Australia. I used to work in a kindergarten and we had a kid around 3 years old who wouldn't and mostly couldn't talk yet. He said a few words at home, but while in kindergarten he only made noises and gestures to get us to understand, but was making progress and we were getting medical help at the request of the mother. At this time, it was popular between the older kids to go to each other's places after kindergarten, and this kid really wanted to join that, but the mother's answer? "When you start talking to your friends, you can go to their place after kindergarten." And no surprise, all our progress was lost, and he locked himself in even more. I was in shock. I just couldn't believe what I'd heard. This woman was so unhappy with her son not talking, nagging day in and day out that we must help her, and she just throws every piece of progress out the window. It was so sad. This actually was just said to me. It happened last year. I'm a dancer and I used to compete on teams and as a soloist. I don't really compete anymore, college, you know? One day I was competing my solo and just touching up my makeup in the dressing room where I accidentally was in the way of a mum and her daughter who was my age. I said, "Sorry, I'll be out of your way in a second," and the mum said I was totally fine and something about sharing a bathroom with siblings. I laugh and say, "Oh yeah, I get you. I have 3 younger siblings myself." And the mum says, "Really? I would have stopped after you." Right in front of her kid. I smiled uncomfortably, grabbed my bag, and moved to the other side of the room. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My first job in my small little town in Australia was manning the toy section of the local Target. It was a lower-end suburb, so there was a pretty big Indigenous population that stayed in the area. Most of the people actually working at the Target were either white or some suitably civilized shade of brown. Anyway, what I'm saying is everyone working there was slightly racist and would pay a little more attention to anyone Indigenous who happened to walk in. To reduce shrinkage, of course. So one day I'm in the toy aisle rearranging all the Barbie dolls that some idiot kids had taken off the shelf and abandoned in homewares when this Aboriginal lady walks by with her daughter. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, and like any 8-year-old, she naturally makes a beeline for the Barbies and picks one up to look at it. Her mum, who let her hand go for a moment, yells, "You put that down or they'll think you're stealing it," and grabs the girl by the hand and walks off. I felt like crap, not the least because that B-word Sandra, who manned the front of the store, had been quietly trailing the two of them since they entered. Imagine being surrounded by that level of hostility your entire life, that you have to pass wisdom like, don't pick stuff up from the shelf or people will think you're stealing, to your kids. People who think Indigenous Aussies should just get over it have no gosh darn idea how bad it is for them in some areas. Made me ashamed to work there. Not someone else, but me. When I was 11 or 12, we went to Disney and my dad kept bugging me about why I looked so unhappy. I wasn't, I just have a resting B-word face. Eventually, we were at some chicken restaurant surrounded by tons of people and he called me an ungrateful B-word in front of about 30 people. Just a month ago, me and my boyfriend went to Disney World in Florida. While eating lunch in a quieter, more isolated area, we saw a dad drag his 8-ish-year-old daughter to a table near us and in hushed tones, but loud enough for us to hear, he said, "You don't deserve to be here, you ungrateful B-word." The rest of the family arrived shortly after with trays of food and the dad pulled out a tinfoil-wrapped sandwich from the mum's purse and threw it at his daughter while the parents and 2 other kids ate the burgers and fries from the quick-serve restaurant. I just felt sick and wanted to cry. I saw a 2 to 3-year-old kid lagging behind his mum. She turned to him and said, "Get up here, motherfricker." Wasn't super disturbing, just funny and kind of vaguely racist. I was iced in Birmingham, Alabama earlier this year. While I was getting some continental breakfast, a man walked up to the coffee dispenser with his daughter of about 4 years of age. He says to her, "Honey, always like your coffee how you like your men, light and sweet." Nothing like vague Alabaman racial bias instilled at a young age. I overheard a mother tell her son that he'd have to hold it in until church was over. The kid was obviously desperate to go and the preacher had only just begun his sermon, but the mother was intent on making him stay for the entire service. I'm the parent in this one. My son has one of those kitchen playsets and various toy or utensil or food items, and refers to playing with the set as home living. An awesome name for it he picked up at daycare. One day, during the height of his infatuation with home living, we were at a store and he wasn't following me, and he kept grabbing stuff off the shelf or was in general engaging in a behavior that I needed to correct him on. So I told him, "Son, you need to listen to me or you're going to lose your home living privilege." It pretty quickly dawned on me that without context, that must have sounded pretty concerning to people around us. That's wonderfully unfortunate. I wonder if you got glared out of the store by everyone in hearing radius. Who knows, maybe a kid as rambunctious as that would enjoy an evening out in the tent in the backyard. Honestly, the young narrator would probably have been thrilled at that prospect. Funny what'll interest a kid under 10 years old. I was in Walmart about 10 years ago. I saw the exact moment a woman grabbed her small son, about 6, by the arm as he was crying and she shook him a few times while yelling, "Break yourself, fool." I was at a condo community pool and overheard children berating this Asian couple. The kids were straight up telling them to go back to China and using slurs. The Asian couple were infuriated and told the kid that he's being racist. They then turned to the mother, and instead of apologizing, the mother told the kids to continue what they were saying and that the Asian couple had no right to tell their kids off. I had no idea what was going on until I put the pieces together an hour after the event. It still makes me mad to this day. My dad used to be a police officer. I was at the grocery store with him, and a woman in line near us had a kid who wouldn't stop crying. She pointed in our direction and told her kid my dad would take him to jail if he didn't shut up. After a day of whale watching, my girlfriend and I stopped off in Buena Park to have dinner. We were sitting in a booth by a window where she could watch the rain. A homeless man came up the sidewalk, pushing a shopping cart overloaded with stuff. She was wearing a halter top and stretch shorts, but it's California and not really cold out. As she's passing, one of her cart wheels hits something and her cart almost tips over. She frantically struggles to keep it upright and only loses the rolled-up blankets and some clothes. She was trying to pick up her stuff, but it wasn't easy with the rain coming down. I heard laughing and turned to see a family, mum, dad, and 2 kids, a boy and a girl, looking about 9 and 12 respectively, watching the woman and having a grand time laughing at her misfortune. Dad pointed at the woman and said something, making everyone roar with laughter, and then the daughter said something. I couldn't hear everything, but the parents were obviously teaching their children to look down and even ridicule the less fortunate. I guess this isn't that disturbing as much as it is what the frick. I once overheard a woman yelling at her toddler for crying. She said, "Shut up, why are you crying? You're acting like such a baby." I don't know which. Maybe it's because it's less than 2 years old and that's how it communicates with the world and lets you know something isn't right. I will not allow you to go to college. This person wasn't talking to the kid, but he was right next to her listening. I heard someone tell her friend that her kid would never move out and he'd be that loser living in his parents' basement all his life, right in front of him. To supplement that awfulness, anytime I did anything my mum didn't like I didn't clean something to her standard, she'd tell me what a loser I was and how worthless I was. I think that's why it bothers me that someone would say that to their kid. Just last night, at my significant other's very Christian parents' house, his mum said to their 27-year-old daughter who's dating for the second time in her life, "That sounds to me like you're pursuing him, and I don't like that." It was eye-opening. Pretty much everything in this thread is things my mother said to me as a child, or rather screamed at me. Except the swearing. She'll never swear. Swearing is punishable by one heck of a beating in her book. Some of the things she thinks are more acceptable to say to a child than swear words include, "I've had enough of you, I'm putting you in a home," she'd pick up the phone and pretend to dial, or "Stop that noise or I'll beat you black and blue." In this case, I'd been crying because I was 4 and my brother had just thrown me, literally out of a bunk bed. I'd already told her this. Here's some others. "You're a B-word. No wonder all your boyfriends leave you. They find out what you're really like." I was a teenager when she said that one. "If it wasn't for me, you'd be starving on the streets because no one else would want you. If you don't stop complaining, I'm going to tell that policeman what you're like at home and he'll throw you straight in prison. Your friend's parents wouldn't put up with this behavior. They'd have got rid of you a long time ago." And so on and so forth, you get the idea. It wasn't like verbal, but once I saw a kid and his mum at a Toys R Us and the child touched one of the displays. His mother panicked at this and yanked his hand away and held it up in the air as she ran him over to the bathroom, presumably to wash his hands. It was so dramatic. "I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it," said my own mother on several occasions. As much as I can't stand kids, this teed me off. In a Walmart checkout line, go figure, some B-word looked at her 5-year-old and told him she'd strangle the breath out of your worthless butt if you don't shut the frick up. Was at the Science Center in St. Louis on Valentine's Day with my girlfriend at the time. We were walking across the covered bridge connecting the two sides and there was a mum with her child walking in front of us. He was maybe a foot in front of her when she screamed at the top of her lungs, "If you keep walking that far in front of me, someone is going to steal you," and just kept walking. The kid didn't even react, and the mum never closed the very small gap between her and her son. Most disturbing to me isn't the nasty or violent stuff, it's the subtle everyday things that bit by bit make the kid view themselves as a bad person. If you tell a child they're naughty or difficult or awkward or whatever every day for years, that child is going to grow up to be those things. It's why when I'm at work, I work in a preschool, I'm careful to chastise children's actions, not the children themselves, when they do something wrong. So there's a noodle place near where I used to live. It's basically a shack that the owners have to build from scratch every night when they open. Pretty third world, I know. Anyway, me and my roommates were having dinner when we overheard the owner of the noodle place saying something to her 2-year-old daughter sucking on a soda bottle. It was something along the lines of, "You better learn how to use your mouth like that now because you'll be doing it a lot when you're older." Me and my roommates stared at each other in disbelief. You have till the count of 3 to stop crying. 1 second passed. 3. The store went dead silent after that and I never heard that voice again. Okay, this isn't something I heard, but it was something I saw, and it was pretty weird and quite disturbing. So I was working as a tourist informer, and then a woman came in with a young girl. She wasn't too young, maybe around 11 or 12, very quiet, quite normal looking, until I realized the woman was keeping the girl on a fricking leash. I'm not kidding. She had like those corsets with leashes that people put on their babies, but for a tween. Their mother just looked at the information and left the girl on the leash. I was like, what the cosmic eternal frick did I just see? What weird habits have you developed from growing up poor? I still can't bring myself to write in Mad Lib books, or on things that could be reused. Growing up ultra-poor, it was a rare treat to get something frivolous, but Mad Libs were also semi-educational, so every once in a while I'd get a new Mad Lib book from my dad. But I felt a ton of anxiety about wasting them by directly writing in them. If I numbered the blanks and then wrote on a separate sheet of paper with the corresponding numbers, I could reuse the books over and over again. Being really poor made me live in this awful anxiety-driven state of don't use it up because you might not get any more anytime soon, and you'd better use it all and not waste anything, which made me overthink and overanalyze my actions. I was confronted by this preference to not mess things up in my master's degree program, because the professor would expressly tell me it was okay to write on the handouts because she'd share the digital copies with us, so we'd have a clean copy to use in our own classes later, and I still couldn't do it. Using plastic grocery bags as trash bags. Don't really see the point in using actual garbage bags. Anytime someone tries to buy me food or anything for me, I always go for the dollar menu or try to go for the lowest amount even if they say buy whatever. I mean, that's just courtesy. When people offer to buy me Starbucks, I order tea. It's the cheapest thing you can get from there. There's an expectation not to order the lobster equivalent on a menu when someone is being nice to you. Operating under a barter system with friends. Where I grew up, there wasn't much money. So people often bartered goods and services and often exchanged small handmade gifts as payment. Then I moved and discovered that wealthier people don't do that at all. Not letting anyone in the house. Even though I don't have to as much, I still calculate how many hours I have to work in order to afford something to decide if it's a need or a want. Do I want to work 2.5 hours to fill my gas tank, or 2.5 hours to buy a single t-shirt? I want the shirt, but the shirt isn't going to get me to work. I really want a Switch and several new games, and I'll have to work at least 9 days to afford the Switch and the 3 games I want. And after I've worked those 9 days, I can't justify spending the money on the Switch and the games. The narrator finds that whenever they have a big expense on the horizon, or something they've been saving towards for a while, one starts to think of other purchases in terms of what fraction of the big spend they would equate to. It gets really hard to enjoy things like an annual gym membership when you realize it's 1/100th of an apartment deposit. It makes you value it more though, I guess. For a brighter side to this, the following commenter provides a counter-argument. This was a huge issue for me. My husband helped me realize that hours of enjoyment are worth something at least. What I did to get our Switch and 2 games is to save 2 days of work time per paycheck. I sacrificed some other things for entertainment and bought it for him on Father's Day. We don't have kids, but he is my puppy papa. After calling around to find the cheapest used Switch combo, we've already enjoyed it for hours more than I worked to get it. Also, our nieces think we're nothing short of gods. I legit cringe when I buy anything slightly expensive, and I find myself constantly buying the super cheap store brands instead of the name brand stuff. I mean, Costco liquor is literally made in the same plants as the name brand stuff. I dated a richer girl who told me she'd never had Chef Boyardee or SpaghettiOs before, but was disgusted by them. Apparently her parents had always told her, growing up, that canned food was for dogs. What the frick? Her saying that hit especially close to home, because I eat SpaghettiOs with a grilled cheese at least 3 times a week. My dad grew up even poorer than me, and he won't eat Chef Boyardee because it's so crappy. I like cheap wine. Even when my budget allows for a $75 bottle, I'll buy the $10. I still prefer thin, rough bath towels. Big fluffy towels are too fluffy. It feels weird when fluffy towels get wet. I grew up middle class and I hated fluffy towels. My mother would buy new ones every couple of months, and it drove me freaking bonkers to the point I just stashed my own supply of rough towels. The other day I was at a thrift store and I saw some towels in a pack and I brought them. $6 brought me 10 towels in what I consider to be perfect condition. After some hot washes with enzymatic detergent and borax, they were amazing. I love these towels. I'm not sure if it's odd or unusual, but my parents used to tell me, eat all the food served, since we were poor and sometimes they wouldn't eat so I could have a full serving of food. I'm no longer poor, but I still eat the full plate no matter how full I am. And yes, I'm aware that you can put food in the fridge for the next day, So it's not the most healthy thing either, but it's the flawed solution my parents found so I wouldn't be picky with the food or not eat on a whim. This really messed me up as a kid. Now I just go without and I eat leftovers from the plates of the kids I watch for friends and family. They think it's funny that I'm only hungry when cooking and when everything else is done. I hope they never figure out how poor I really am. Toast with butter and cinnamon is my favorite go-to for breakfast. Eating fast. I had 4 siblings and only so much food was made for dinner. If you didn't eat fast, you didn't eat. Yeah, I know the feeling. However, I learned to eat fast from prison. I haven't served time since '94, but I still wolf down my food to this day. It's a hard habit to break. I just buy 1 pair of trainers and I wear them until they fall off my feet. Then I buy a new pair. I make good money as an adult, but I still do this. I also don't buy branded clothes. I worked with a guy and we earned the same money, yet he collected limited edition trainers and drove an expensive car. I just couldn't comprehend the waste in money. I cycle everywhere because it's good for my health. I moved to Switzerland in a few weeks for a job that pays 2.5 times my current salary, and I still intend to cycle everywhere. I am, to this day, unable to manage my money. Going from not being able to spend anything to having at least $300 left for whatever I want made me spend recklessly. You'd think it would be the opposite growing up poor, but spending feels so good. This is fairly common. Most people in your situation will buy things since experience has taught them they don't know when they'll have money to spend things on again. So they end up spending it all, thus having no more money. I love Little Caesars $5 pizza more than fancy brick oven pizza because spending that gives me too much anxiety to enjoy the food. I was visiting my folks and my mum ordered pizza from Round Table, Southern California, and it came out to $64 for 2 large pizzas and 1 small. What the frick? Not having a lot of clothes. I can't stand a cluttered closet, and having more than about 3 pairs of shoes seems excessive to me. Ditto. I had 4 pairs of shoes once, and I felt like I was suffocating, but they were all necessary. You know, 1 pair for work, 1 for church, 1 for daily use, and 1 pair of gym shoes. Not filling up the gas tank because you might really need the money later. $10 at a time. Save another $10, that's food for a week just in case. There were 5 of us growing up, so we always had our good clothes and our everyday clothes. We changed out our good clothes as soon as we got home from school, and I still have this habit to this day. I changed out of my work clothes and into lounge around the house I don't care clothes as soon as I get home. The narrator does this too, but it's as much out of a desire, nay, a need to lounge on the couch in his underpants in a slovenly, disgusting fashion than any sense of self-preservation for his good clothes. Off-brand foods. So much cheaper. Love me a can of beans. If I have no dinner, no problem, I get a can of beans. They're also super healthy and food for your digestive system. You know what? I've gotten used to not having a bed frame, and I ended up using just the mattress and box spring and having old flat pillows instead of new fluffed up ones. I can sleep anywhere. Slept on the floor for a good couple of years, and I can handle heat pretty well because we didn't have AC. It was a 1-window unit until senior year. Can literally watch anything and be entertained because we only had 1 local Channel 10 station. Saying all this sounds like I grew up in the 50s, but gosh darn it, this was all in the mid-2000s. I still buy used clothes. Me too. I try to say it's because I want to be environmentally conscious, but really, I just can't bring myself to spend more than $6 on a top. I eat a lot of frozen chicken pot pies. The crust is amazing. Lots of people mix it all up. I eat the crust last, but I hate crust on actual pie. I developed a dislike of wearing new shoes. I prefer old, worn-out shoes. The new pairs feel too rigid. Even though I have the money to replace them now, I still wear the same pair of boots I brought my senior year in high school. I'm in my mid-20s now. They've been worn through every crappy job I've worked through college, and in every office job I've worked since getting my degree. Through most of my good times, hardships, and adventures, they've been what's on my feet. It's an odd thing to get attached to, but when you've had them for years and they're broken in just right, they're a tough thing to replace. Keeping all of my clothes even though I'll never wear them. I didn't have much growing up, so now I feel like I need to keep everything. A close friend grew up very poor and unsupported. Things were always a competition between him and his brothers, so he maintained that mentality into adulthood in many respects. Fast forward to us going to a Smash Bros tournament. He's egging me on while I'm playing the other people, but I'm sincerely supportive of him when he goes up for his own match. As we leave the store, he basically says, "Wow, I was a butthole to you while you were constantly cheering me on. I feel kinda bad now." He just prefers being competitive in nearly any aspect, though it's certainly gotten way calmer lately. I get freaked out if my pantry isn't full. It doesn't even matter if it's food I like, I just have this fear of not having food in the house. Not turning on the heater no matter how cold it gets, just layer up and lots of blankets. Saving every cent I can. I'm talking 80 cents for 60-cent cans of beans, and never buying actual brand name anything. Pinching pennies never seems to leave you. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mac and cheese with tuna. Cheap, but so good. I ignore the dates on a lot of food. The milk I smell just before I use it to make sure it's not sour. Constantly checking the bread for mold when I know it's past the date. Smelling the meat before I cook it to make sure it's okay. Unless something is like 6 or more months past the date, it's usually good. The expiration is just the warning that means you have to start checking it. This shouldn't be a poor thing. Food waste is so terrible, and most of those dates are either inaccurate or mean best before, which is about quality, not edibility. And with some things, you can pick or cut off the mold, like cheese. Maybe bad fruit in a bunch, cooking it more thoroughly or cooking it early to then eat a couple of days later. Buying cheap things and making peace with the fact that they will eventually break, it may not taste good or it won't fit me, instead of investing in something long-lasting. I can't travel. I'd love to, I could probably afford to now, but dropping any amount of money on a trip seems insane to me. I grew up never really going anywhere outside of a 3-hour drive and only stayed in hotels maybe about 3 times while I was under 18. It also feels weird to be in debt, but managing it. I have medical bills that I'm paying off, and credit card stuff, but it's all pretty manageable. Growing up, my mum constantly would get payday loans, and we had bill collectors calling non-stop about medical debt, and my mum maxed out every credit card she owned. So I was taught that debt was horrible and you could never get out of it. Also, I really love microwaved tortillas and cheese as a whole meal. That and lettuce, cheese, and ranch wrapped up in a tortilla. I think back on it though, and I'm really not sure how my parents raised me with how much they made. I make double now what both my parents' combined income was when I was in high school, and I really don't even make that much. Plus-sized women. The only skinny chicks in the hood were the working girls who did smack. You know, I never considered this aspect of growing up in a rougher neighborhood. I mean, that might just be your personal taste as well. But it sure would be interesting to do a study of some sort on it based on people from different backgrounds. Leftovers are my jam. I take home friends' leftovers. I have no shame. I can find a good way to reheat just about anything. Expiration dates are like yellow lights. The concept of selling a car is entirely foreign to me. We drive cars until they die so completely that even the junkyard doesn't want to pay for them. Keeping the lights off almost all the time, or biking everywhere. Only ever buying clothes if there's a really good sale. I never just go out to buy new clothes. I like fake maple syrup better than the real stuff. I love walking everywhere. If it's within a 60-minute walk, sometimes even longer, I'm that person that will walk and wants everyone to join me for the exercise and adventure, when everyone else is begging me to take a 5 or 10-minute Lyft or Uber. Heck no! Why would I pay for something when I can get exercise and have a pleasant stroll for free? It's just so nice to walk around and see your city. My friends will pay $5 for an Uber to not walk 5 minutes in the relatively okay part of downtown LA. But I enjoy walking around and seeing the buildings, people, hot dog stands, and random YouTubers, which I would normally have missed out on had I gotten an Uber and started scrolling Instagram. Little strolls make you appreciate the little things in life. I'll start with my own. I can't stand actual quality toilet paper. I can only tolerate the cheap sandpapery thin garbage. The nice plush stuff feels gross to me. We used to eat butter bread, which is just butter on one slice of bread folded over hot dog style. Still slaps to this day, I don't care. I'm plus-sized and losing weight quickly now. I've come to believe being fat in the first place, for me, has a lot to do with never knowing if we'd have enough food from week to week. Also, I grew up with the mentality of, if it's free, take it and take as much as you can. I used to enjoy just eating a tub of saltines, with butter if I felt fancy. My parents grew up poor and we didn't rise well into the middle class until a decade into my father's career. It still shows. We always do leftovers and plan several meals around discounted food. Say a big piece of beef or turkey after the holidays. We'll have a nice meal and then eat nothing but turkey for about 2 weeks afterwards. Even now that my dad is well off, they don't buy new cars and their house is a construction project because they brought a teardown in a nice neighborhood. My siblings and I all play instruments and all our instruments are second-hand or broken pieces my dad refurbished and gave to us as our birthday or Christmas presents. We also do joint mum and dad and grandma and grandpa gifts, laptops as high school graduation presents. When I was younger, my mum used to have a coupon book and she lived by it. But after my dad started making more, she just stopped. I also remember driving and never flying, like driving clear across the US because it was cheaper than 4 tickets plus a dog. Only buying clothes to go back to school, and then finding out that in the working world, this turns into only buying clothes for a new job. I don't like giving or receiving opulent, frivolous gifts. I always feel harshly like the money should be saved or spent on something practical. Eating cold food out of a tin. Not a problem. Conversely, hot cocoa made with water. I never take anything for granted. Even though I have a good job that pays 6 figures, I always spend frugally and have ample savings and a backup plan in the event that I should become unemployed. I don't waste money on non-essentials and I try to make things last as long as possible, like cars or electronics, before I replace them. I secretly feel like anyone who orders any drink but water at a restaurant is insane. Even when my in-laws take us out, I order water because I don't want to take advantage of them. Not flushing the toilet. My dad said it was to save water. I flush water in public bathrooms, just not my own. Ugh, my dad used to do this. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to take a leak, lift the toilet lid and be confronted by the odor of his fermenting pee. I like splurging when it's for something special for someone else. I hate buying something nice that I really want for myself, and worse when someone else goes out of their way to give me something nice. Canned green beans are better than frozen or fresh green beans. Change my mind. When people use 2 to 3 paper towels to dry their hands off when it can be done with just 1 sheet, or using paper towels at all, that's what hand towels are for. Dish rags were for washing dishes and Dad's old white undershirts were cut into pieces for cleaning. Paper towels were a luxury right up there with paper plates. No spending money on stuff you're just going to throw away. Except toilet paper, thank God my parents were never too cheap for that. Thank you to our authors for once again confronting the narrator with the truly rainforest butchering amount of paper towels he goes through on a weekly basis. I've really got to tone that crap down. I grew up with some money but don't have much nowadays. My family bought an old house and renovated it. I was involved there since I was about 10 years old. And I've always been interested in crafting and woodworking and such. I learned electronics in a specialized school for 2 years until I decided to do something else. So I like doing stuff myself. I know how to fix most electronic devices, so when I want something new, I just buy it as broken off eBay or flea markets and fix it. I don't remember what I paid for this 21-inch LG screen that I'm currently looking at, but it wasn't much because it didn't work. A capacitor for less than €1 fixed it. I do woodworking and build my own furniture, some at least, preferably with wood that others don't need anymore. I always cook at home and bake my own bread. And actually, I buy cheap, but usually stuff that's good quality. My latest is an old broken drill, Metabo. I paid €1 for it and it's already running again. People just don't know how to fix things and throw everything away once it stops working. Cold hot dogs are still one of my favorite snacks. Super cheap and quick, and it's basically a bologna tube. Also, not really a preference, but I'll never touch a random dog or walk up behind one without making myself known and asking the owner if it's okay. It seems obvious, but living in LA, people will grab or let their children pet strange dogs without even asking. Growing up, every dog was seen as a guard dog until someone said otherwise. Medicine, painkillers, and doctor visits are too expensive. If it isn't sufficient to interfere with work, then you deal with it. I'm between jobs at the moment. Recently went to a minutes clinic in CVS because I thought I had a blood clot. I was there for less than 5 minutes, turned out to be a large burst blood vessel. Cost me $140, and the next time I think I'll just risk dying. A Totino's pizza roll in the microwave is better than a Totino's pizza roll from the oven. Leftovers must be eaten. Food waste is not a thing in my house. If I have to throw out any food, I just think, well, that's money and a meal wasted. It makes me anxious and angry. Can't help myself though. I was starved as a child along with being poor and was homeless for a year. Food is everything. I'm not materialistic and I can't really relate to those that are. I don't send food back that is wrong unless it's disgusting. I'll eat what was given to me. I slept in my jeans because there was no heating in my childhood home until my mum remarried. I did this until I was 14 and I noticed that some of the blue denim dye had actually made my knees bluish-grey. I had to stop then. Doing a large load of laundry so I don't waste water and detergent on a smaller load. My mum used to get annoyed when we did a load but didn't fill it all the way because it wasted water. My boyfriend's mum doesn't understand why I let the hamper become full because she'll do a load that has 4 pieces of clothing in it. She basically washes whatever she wore that day the same day. Maybe she'll combine 2 days' worth of clothes. I know exactly how much I can put in the washer and have it be really full, but not so full that the clothes don't come out fully cleaned. Also, ramen. Loved ramen when I was a kid and money was tight, and I love it now. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.